this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode. Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and okay. Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Yes, you are all wonderful. Thank you for coming back. Everything is good over here. I know everybody tells me what's happening with the animals. I lost a rooster and a chicken, and c'est la vie in chicken world. That's one thing you learn when you have animals, especially livestock or chickens. Even though my chickens usually are very long-lived, sometimes they're killed like by an owl or something, and sometimes they just, even though they don't appear sick, that's what happened to one of my roosters. And one of my other girls, you could tell something was going on with her. She wasn't eating, and like I said before, when an animal doesn't eat, even though you leave them and you isolate them, and that's it. That's the kiss of death. Literally, that's the kiss of death. Because eventually, and she had plenty of water and everything, and I was looking at her, and it's like, and I've seen that before. There's some weird thing chickens got going on. Like I've treated it enough times to know that sometimes there is no treatment for it. So yeah, so now I'm gonna be on the lookout for the non-existent chicks that everybody runs into all the feed stores and basically empties out the bins by the time you get there. Because I guess because of the is whether you want to call it the high cost of eggs or whatever. Normally around this time, all the feed stores bring in all these chicks, different breeds, and you're guaranteed to get like chicken pullets or what are going to be female hens. But now, I kid you not, I go in there and the bins, they've got the light bulbs on, and when I look in there, it's like nothing, zero. And there's a couple of places I've gone to, so yeah. And and this is the thing, even when you get them, you got to get them through chickhood, and then if you've got hens there, and depending on the breed, they might not start laying for 4 to 6 months. All right, something like that. And there's a whole series of things that can happen when they're chicks. Before you get them to egg laying land is what I'm saying. But anyway, yeah, that's where I'm at right now, where I'm thinking and told everybody. Everybody goes, well, go buy some chickens. No, because I have what they call a closed flock, which means I do not bring in chickens into my flock because sometimes if you could bring in a disease, unbeknowing, the chicken might look all healthy, especially if you buy sometimes these chickens at these God, there's swap meets. There's places, a lot of places that you can buy chickens from, like full grown. When I mean chickens, like hens or roosters or whatever. But you got to be real careful. You bring a disease in, and that's it. It'll wipe out your flock. So, but the only thing I bring in are the chicks, which they ship them over from the hatchery. But yeah, that's another mini lesson in chicken. When you're a chickenista, you know about these. So anyway, another news, in which, by the way, will be appropriate when you see who our guest is. Hopefully, I'm going to be releasing my book uh, before the summer. How's that? Okay, I'm in. It's in the throes of editing, and let me tell you, as hard as writing is, the editing part has got to be like, you know, either you come up with great ideas or you look at something and go, what was I thinking? Especially this book that's taken me a really long time. I don't know. I've massaged this 20 ways. It's like, so I'll keep you guys updated again. If you sign up to the Substack newsletter, I am going to have information on the release date on Amazon. I'll probably have a free giveaway, at least on the Kindle version of it, maybe the first week it comes out. Let's see. Let's see. But I gotta finish giving a real known date for my editing before I can say, okay, it's gonna be released on this date. One of those deals. All right. You know what they say about good intentions and best laid plans? Well, that kind of deal. But anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who is our guest today at Stories of the Supernatural. This is the first time she's here. Her name is Cyn Shrader Hill. She's a native of Fayetteville, Tennessee, home of the very haunted Old Fayetteville Hospital, where she worked closely with the hospital's owner, making EVP the host team for special events and investigation. She has 5 books: Whispers in the Dark, True Ghost Stories and Eerie Tales, Web of Terror short story collection. She did this in collaboration with Mark Foltz, Elliot Foltz, which Mark has. I've interviewed Mark. I love Mark, by the way. They're speaking. Are you listening? My most compelling EVPs. It's not goodbye. Signs from beyond, and Realm of Shadows. True Ghost Stories and Eerie Tales. She's a sensitive and empath. She's known others were around her since she was very young. She's also been rescued a few times over the years from very dangerous incidents. Cyn has helped other paranormal teams as well as law enforcement officers with EVP, which stands for Electronic Voice Phenomena Analysis. Her desire to see and speak to those on the other side has sent her to many of the most famous and fascinating locations, such as Gettysburg, Alcatraz, Goliad Presidio La Bahia, Winchester Mystery House, the Birdcage Theater, which is in Arizona at Tombstone, Tower of London, Heian Jinju Shrine, and Rothenburg Dungeons, among others. As the founder of Elk Valley Paranormal, she likes to be able to offer her clients some sense of relief from any unexplained happenings, whether paranormal or not. That they've experienced EVP, isn't afraid to reach out to work with other teams, and has had several successful co-investigations. Cyn was privileged to have an investigation photo or of a spirit feeding off of a Ouija board in Lynchburg, Tennessee, which was printed in T.L. L. Gray's book Shades of Angels. She is currently working on her next 3 books of true stories titled Death's Door NDEs, Angel Rescues, and Spirit Warnings. The second book in her science series, It's Not Goodbye 2, number 2, More Signs from Beyond, and Chills of Fears. Hill and her psychic medium friend and very talented trance artist Mark Elliott Foltz have formed their own company to publish their books, which is Foltz Hill Press. She's working on Mark's next books as well as her own. Help me welcome her. How are you doing today, Cyn?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me on.
On the contrary, it's great. It's great. By the way, I have to interject. I've interviewed Mark, is it 2 or 3 times? He's such a hoot. I love talking to Mark.
He's he's one of my very best friends and my
I
favorite
love
dog.
talking to Mark.
Yeah, we talk all the time, and he's my first go-to if I have a
Hmm.
question in anything paranormal.
Well, you know what's really funny is you talk to Mark and he's funny and everything, but then when you ask him something about the paranormal, he can get very serious and very knowledgeable really quick.
Like that.
All of a sudden it's like,
Immediately.
no, nope.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's what I love about him. That he'll be laughing and cracking a joke. And what was it? Last time I spoke to him, he's, yeah, I'm the fat psychic or something like that. He told me something along the lines. I look, and I had to laugh because, okay, Mark. But yeah, but then he's very knowledgeable
Oh.
when it comes to the paranormal and things of that nature. Let me ask you. It says here you had experiences as a kid. What happened?
Uh, I didn't know what was happening. I had my first deja vu experience when I was 6 years old.
Okay,
So that was during school art period, sitting in front of the bulletin board, drawing the American flag, the symbol of the United States, as a matter of fact, the
right,
symbol,
right.
the seal. And I got to the talons and drawing the arrows, and I'd done that before, except I hadn't. I was six.
Okay.
So that started kind of some weird things happening. Um, there, I had a doll collection. Something
Oh,
was attached to at least one of the dolls that I had.
really?
So
Okay,
just little things like that over the
okay.
years.
Let me ask you with this. With the doll thing, do you think it was negative or it was just something that was there that maybe you felt companionship with it or what?
No, it was not companionship. It was something that was watching me,
Ooh,
and
okay.
I could not change clothes in my own room. I
That
It was one of those things that, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what which one it was attached to. No
right.
idea. So I would turn
And let me tell you
all
something, for a kid to
around.
be, because usually kids are like, they'll put on clothes and take off. They don't,
Oh
kids
yeah.
usually don't pay attention to stuff like that. So for
Mm-mm.
you to be aware that I feel like I'm being watched,
Hmm. And
that
this
speaks
was this
volumes.
was like 8 years old
Yes.
and to 10 to 12 around in there.
Was
So
it
it
an
was
old doll or was it like a more modern doll? Was it something that somebody, like a recent purchase?
I had a collection of old and new.
Okay.
So most of what I had were things that my parents would bring back from trips, or their friends would bring back
Okay.
from overseas.
Yes.
So I had
You have no idea.
dolls from all over, had no idea. I had a couple of China dolls, and I
Mm-hmm.
still have those.
And
And
it's not that,
it was not attached to the China dolls.
yes, I believe it.
Um,
I
so
believe it. Sometimes we think it's
whatever,
only the old things, but not necessarily.
no, no, whatever it was, I don't have it anymore. I ended
Okay.
up getting rid of those dolls.
Yeah.
They're
It's like,
they're
okay, I'm not going to figure out which one of you it is, so you're all going. You're all
they're
out of here.
and everything I have now,
Mm-hmm.
were special to me for whatever reason. My grandmother gave them to me,
Right.
or they it was from a special place I'd gone to, and
Right.
none of the things that I have with me have attachments.
Well, I've talked about with other people that, how sometimes people pick up curbside things or garage sales or the flea market. And I tell everybody, you got to be a little bit careful with some of these things because sometimes there's either it's too good to be true, especially like stuff that you find curbside. Not all the time. I don't want people to get
Right.
paranoid, but you'd be surprised. You can bring in an attachment or something on one of these items.
One of the weirdest thing that has happened to my team, we did one of our last investigations was around the Decatur
Mm-hmm.
area in Alabama,
Okay.
and Michael, one of our newest members, got us
Okay.
that investigation. They were having
Mm-hmm.
problems. It was a family, extended family. So they had the mother, daughter, granddaughter, cousin, that kind of thing, living
Okay.
in this one dwelling. Um, it was a trailer, it was a double
Okay.
wide. Um, it was cluttered.
Okay.
Usually clutter can stir things up or
Almost
keep things
definitely again.
stagnant. So
Yes.
if you can clear out the clutter, which
Yes.
I need to do myself in my own house,
But
but
how can I say it though? There's clutter and then there's clutter like I don't know how to
overwhelming.
yeah, there's something there that speaks maybe of other this something else going on underneath the stuff that might be fueling.
Almost hoarding. Yeah,
Right, like a
almost
hoardish
hoarding.
where it's either part of or the dynamics of what's going on is producing
Hmm.
or making it worse the paranormal events. I don't know if you understand what I'm
Right.
saying. Not
Yeah.
just that you have a lot of stuff because no, that's a different thing.
No.
But go ahead, keep
Hmm.
going.
Well, this we tried everything. We were looking for everything, anything and everything. We had already done a questionnaire with the family. We'd gone over the questionnaire with the family. We
Okay.
had done a walkthrough. We had taken pictures. We had done baseline sweeps and a little bit of everything. Um, we had separated so
Mm-hmm.
that I walked through by myself. Sean and Michael had walked through. Um, just different dynamics. Okay, let me see what
Right.
I feel. Let me see. You tell me what you felt, that kind of thing. We all found the whole way to be a little bit something off.
Okay.
Something was off energy wise. So they checked as far as EMF, and
Mm-hmm.
something was going off around that area.
Okay.
And we were going back and forth trying to figure out exactly where it was. Ended up, it was in the little girl's room
Ah, okay.
at the grandbabies.
Uh-huh.
And this little girl was, I think she was 6 or 7.
Okay.
So she was in school.
All right.
Um, she had toys just like kids do. They've got them
Mm-hmm.
just about everywhere. And her room, of course, had her clothes in it, her bed, the closet. We opened the closet. It's just a kid's closet, you know,
Right.
stuff in it, piles of toys, things like that. The EMF was going off mostly around her closet.
Okay.
And so we started pulling things out one by one.
Mm-hmm.
Sean and Michael would hold up.
Just to
Uh,
like see which item
yeah,
per item. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, to see. And so they pulled out this stuffed animal
Oh,
and it went off. All of our bells and whistles went off.
here you
And so
go.
they checked it. Okay, where's the battery pack?
Mm-hmm.
No battery pack.
Okay.
There's no electronic anything in
Okay.
this stuffed animal. It's just a stuffed animal.
Okay.
Why was that thing
Yes, of all
causing
things.
anything to go off? Took it outside, it still went off. So
Yes.
it was the animal itself.
Right.
We we asked the grandmother, "What do you know about this thing?" And she said, "Oh, we picked that up at a yard sale. I think I paid a quarter for it.
Okay.
My
Yes.
granddaughter would not leave without it. Now she doesn't want to play with it, so she just shoved it in her closet.
Right.
Well, it's got something attached to it."
Yes. Yes.
So we had to take it out. Michael actually took it from
Okay.
them
Mm-hmm.
and took care of it, buried it, that kind of thing.
And that's the thing that everybody thinks that something's got an attachment. It's got to look weird or unusual. And the most innocuous looking thing, like a teddy bear,
Yeah, yeah.
will have something,
It,
some weird
it
attachment, or it might be intelligent, it might not be intelligent. It might have been in a sick room,
hmm hmm
just picking up
whatever it
negative
was,
vibes.
whatever it was, had really tempted that little girl, and then she'd gotten a little bit afraid of it.
Yes, isn't that
No,
weird?
she didn't want it. She didn't even want to see it.
Okay, that's probably why it was stuck in the closet.
Yeah, down in a pile with stuff
Yeah.
on top of it. So
Yeah, and kids sometimes they don't know. They just act on how they feel like, let's put that in a
sure,
closet. I don't. And
yeah.
did that client ever say that once the bear was gone,
It
was everything
changed
okay?
like that
Really?
immediately.
Ah, there you
Immediately.
go.
Yeah.
Okay. And what were they experiencing before that they called you guys in?
They were having everything from footsteps, uh, cabinets opening, closing, which I never
Ooh,
saw any of that. We never heard any footsteps while we were there. It
right.
was just the EMF going off and the lights,
Yes.
different things like that going off.
Mm-hmm.
Did not get any EVPs. It
It
was
was just
just,
that thing with a bear.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
See how weird it is? Everybody thinks, here this bear is producing maybe what sounds like the sound of a human.
Yeah.
Like what you're saying, stuff being moved around in the kitchen and things like that.
hmm hmm Causing all both kids were having bad dreams.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's a
I
good sign
think
right
the
there.
grandmother had even started having bad dreams.
Yes, that's one of the
Yeah.
signs that people don't realize.
Mm-mm.
Everybody can have a nightmare. It's like, come on, it's not all paranormal. But when you
Mhm.
start having a lot of nightmares amongst the
And then your
family and
family
kids,
is, yeah.
yes, there's something going on that's producing that. There's
Mhm,
definitely that you need to look. A lot of people don't realize that that's sometimes a sign of some type of, if you want to call it spiritual turbulence or something's
mhm,
going on.
mhm.
Something. So, I tell everybody, y- I would say you should even smudge or put holy water. You pick up anything, no, whatever it is, just before you bring it into the house, because again, You just never know what it was used
You
for.
never know.
Maybe Uncle Sam's favorite chair that he barely used and he died. We left it out, and guess what? You're bringing not only the chair but Uncle Sam to go with it. Because that was his
Hmm.
favorite rocking chair.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
happens.
Never know.
You
You
never
never
know.
know.
Yeah,
A friend of mine, her husband's mother was attached to some of the furniture that they had.
say yeah,
So, yeah,
yes,
she had called me over when Chip had gone to work, and she said, "Come over and see if you feel or sense anything." So I went over, and we were just sitting in the living room talking. And her flat screen TV was in front of me,
mm-hmm,
about 5 feet away from me, but it was off. And I was sitting there talking to her. And then I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I looked at the flat screen, and this beautiful redheaded woman walked behind me. And of course,
right,
I turned to look
right,
and see nothing. But
right.
Pam said, "Did you just see something?" And I said, "Who's the redhead?" And she said, "Oh, you saw her?" And I
Oh
said,
wow,
"She's beautiful. Long red hair. She's wearing a ball gown. She had one of these, it looked like from the 70s or 80s, where
okay,
it was um a strapless, but then they
yes,
had those scarves that went
yes,
and draped all the way down to the floor.
right,
That's what she had on.
and
And beautiful. Oh, she was gorgeous. And I told her, I said, "She is dressed to the nines. I don't know where she's going, but she is dressed." And she said, "That's Chip's mother."
oh
And
boy,
I said, "Well, she's showing herself around 20 ish to 25 ish, somewhere along in there. And she's dressed like she's going to the ball." But all
incredible.
she wanted
Had they
was,
seen her themselves?
they had heard her.
Okay,
But
okay.
when I described her, she said, "That's Chip's mother."
And I bet
And
you because he has pictures of his mom when she was
yes,
younger. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And she said, before she died, she had told them to take care of her furniture.
Yes.
Don't do anything. Don't get rid of it. Don't mess it up.
Mhm.
Take care of it. And so she was just around making sure that they were taking care of it.
People don't understand that certain personalities are attached to their material. I don't want to say they're more materialistic, but they're just more attached to their things.
Hmm.
Whereas some people don't care what you do with my stuff. Once I'm
Right.
gone, it's bye. There's other people that to them their things are like like the preciousest that
Hmm.
they still feel that way.
And
Even
it
after they're gone, they're giving instructions as in,
yes, you better take care of it.
yeah, better take care of it and don't get rid of it and be like, but yeah,
And it could
that
be anything. It could be anything, to
anything.
a hat
Yes.
pin, a little
Yes.
lapel pin or something, or a
Yes.
ring.
People get that to you you would say and like, what's the big deal? Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, but people are weird. Their personalities are just whatever the connection is. As a matter of fact, a lot of people that have that hoarding tendencies, like the ones like when you see, they give like one of the reasons why they have a hard time getting rid of stuff is that they form like a relationship. They give a personality to inanimate objects. That's why they have such a hard time. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but as far as like when they tell them, "Hey, we're gonna throw these things away," they're like, "No,"
Oh,
no, because they formed like a bond, like what
yes.
people do, like with other people or with animals. But yeah, there's personalities that are like that. I think that's my theory. I think a lot of these ghosts sometimes that they'll say, "Oh, it's the old owner or the guy that built the house that they never left." And there was no tragedy per se. And you're
Right.
thinking, why is this person still sticking around? It's because their personality was, "This is my home, or I built it. It's my place.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I'm just gonna
Blood,
stay
sweat,
here.
and
I don't
tears.
care."
Yeah. Put his blood, sweat, and tears in that house, and
Yes,
he's
yes,
staying.
and they're
He's
staying
staying.
exactly. And
And and
yeah, go
you'll
ahead.
and people ask a lot of times, after a remodeling situation where
Hmm.
that can stir things up, but after somewhere has been remodeled, they'll have ghosts walking through the walls. Well, that
Yes,
used to be a doorway.
exactly. A lot of people have found that out that if they've ever find out, like, why do I keep seeing this whatever going into the wall. It's like they find out
Mhm,
later there was a door there, or
mhm.
something was there, or something was rearranged. Same
Yeah,
thing I want to say with workplaces. I say, you know what? There's such a thing as a workaholic, where this person's life was not really their best place was at work, not at home.
yeah,
This is they sometimes and then I tell once upon a time, people used to work 20 and 30 years at the same spot, and they formed relationships with their coworkers.
mhm.
And if, especially if they were a workaholic, this was their happy place. Because you're thinking, why would you haunt your workplace? It's because this is where they felt the happiest,
That's
or where
right.
they felt they had ownership of it, and maybe they worked there for 30 years,
You
and
know,
they have good memories because,
mhm. my
and yeah,
my mom and dad had an auto parts store
there you go.
here
See,
in town, and
mm-hmm,
my dad died in 2001. My mother and my sister tried to keep the auto parts store going, but
mm-hmm,
in the Bible Belt here, two
right,
women running an auto parts store with O'Reilly's, Advanced,
yeah, it's
AutoZone,
like,
and
and
Walmart, it's just not going to happen.
yeah,
So they ended up having to close it, and my
mm-hmm,
husband cleaned it out, and I had a paranormal team come in
okay,
just to see if my dad was still there because I
okay,
hadn't gotten any sign from him, and I was a daddy's girl.
okay,
So this was in 2013.
all right,
We lost him in 2001. They'd ended up closing the store in about 2003,
okay,
somewhere around in there, 3 or 4. And so, all utilities, nothing was on. My husband had gutted it. So
okay,
yeah, all the paperwork, everything was gone. And I stood in the dark talking to my dad, trying to
okay.
get him to nothing, nothing. The only place that their instruments lit up is exactly the spot where my dad's chair sat for 30 years
Oh, see, yeah,
because he was
yes,
always there.
yeah,
He would get there early and he
mm-hmm,
would leave late. He would actually sit after closing, which they closed about 5:30.
mm-hmm.
Mom would go home, they would have dinner ready, and dad would sit and watch Hee Haw.
I remember Hee Haw.
He
Yes.
would watch that, and he would watch Wheel of Fortune. He
Yes.
had to watch a couple of those, and he would have a drink after
Yeah.
work and sit
Yes.
there and wind down. And
Sure.
then he would go home and have dinner.
Yeah, there you go. And this
So,
was his routine. This was his happy moment. Yes. People don't
mhm,
understand that habit. This was like this is the reward for a good day's work. How's that?
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And he did it.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that incredible? The one spot where he had his rocking chairs where you guys get a reading.
That was the only spot. That was the only spot.
Wow.
They got
That's incredible.
2 EVPs, and that's what actually started me
Okay.
interested in audio. And I actually joined their team that
Okay.
evening. They asked me to be case manager, so I would find places for us.
Okay.
And they got 2 EVPs. One was something not connected to my family at all. It was holy mackerel, which to me, that's something that was said in the 1930s, 40s, or 50s, somewhere along in there.
Okay.
Before there was an auto parts store, there was a furniture store, there was a Red Cross
I was
building.
about to ask you how old was that building?
It was very old.
Okay.
There was a ice cream factory. There was in the 1800s.
Oh wow, it goes back that far.
Yes, in the 1800s, the basement was actually street level, and it was a turkey slaughterhouse.
Oh, 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 oh,
Yeah,
oh,
and
oh.
so they had
Oh my
an
God.
EVP of turkeys clucking.
Yes, I was gonna say that imprint is very,
Yeah.
yeah, that is. I noticed that.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, it's really funny because they did this study. I think I can't remember what university out of Canada, I think it was, but I can't remember particularly. They did a study and they noticed that areas around slaughterhouses, they don't understand why there's an uptick in violent crimes. And they think that it has to do, and part of me is I don't know, was the area of the slaughterhouse a bad area to begin with, neighborhood wise? Maybe that's it. I don't know how they vetted the area, but bottom line,
Yeah.
they kind of did a study where, like, in other words, the vibrations or on a metaphysical level, whatever comes off like slaughterhouses or where they, even if it's an animal,
Hmm.
does something to the area around it.
It almost
And
has to. All that
yeah,
blood trauma
yes, yes, I
almost
believe that.
has to.
Yes,
And
and it.
you know, before the store is torn down now,
Mm-hmm.
but before they tore it down, you could walk down in that basement. There were still the two huge vats that they would boil
Wow,
turkeys in. Hooks still hung from the ceiling.
wow. And again, and I don't
So
know. I've told everybody I don't know what it is about basements, cellars, mines, anything
yeah,
that's buried has something. There's always, if there's a paranormal event, it's got a dark slant to it. I don't know what it
yeah,
is about anything that's in the earth. I don't know why.
yeah. And a lot of the buildings around my little square in
Mm-hmm.
Fayetteville, most of them have things going on that,
Interesting.
and a lot of the owners of these places don't like to talk about it, but you'll find a handful that
That
will
will say.
say, yeah, we got some activity.
Don't
And
they do? They do that thing. Well, I haven't told, and you don't tell anybody about it, but
yeah,
you know, but
yes, that's how it usually starts.
yeah,
But
yeah.
a lot of the businesses around the square have wells in
Oh
the
yeah.
basement.
Oh my God. Yes, people don't understand that there's people. And by the way, a lot of times, some of these houses later on, they don't know they have a well
No,
underneath their houses.
did Mark ever tell you about his well?
No, maybe he did, but go ahead and tell me.
Holy cow. That that it's torn down now, but he took me over. This was his uh grandparents' house in
Okay.
Chattanooga.
Okay.
And he always saw things when he was little at this
Mm-hmm.
house, and just kind of weirded out by the basement.
Okay.
And so even his cousin had made an art studio for her in the basement, and she did not even want to go down there.
Wow.
Something about it, they would say, "Well, go draw, go paint for a little while," and she would go outside and hide for an
Yes, forget it.
hour
I'm not going in
instead
there.
of going in that basement to paint.
Mm-hmm.
So Mark has seen faces in that basement, looking out
Here
the
we go.
window, different things.
Holy
So
crap.
he takes me one day, broad daylight, and he goes, I said, I want to see it. And he said, okay, all right. So we go up. It's no one's living there. And
Right.
he opens the door to the basement, and we walk in. So the way the house was situated is from the front
Mm-hmm.
of it, you couldn't see the basement area, and it was
Okay.
like built on a hill, right?
Okay.
But you could walk in the basement from the lower side,
Right.
which
Okay.
is what we did. And I walked in, and immediately I was like, ooh, I don't, mm, I'm not sure
Yeah.
about this. And he walked over. He said, come here, I want to show you something. And he walked over and he said, here's the well. And immediately when he said well, and I looked up and saw it, I said, Mark, get away from there. Get away from there. Get away
Okay.
from there. And he said, I'm okay. I said, please get away from there.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So he said, I know. He said, something's weird about it. I know.
Yes, I bet. Let me tell you
Mm,
something. There's, that there's been areas where people they've had wells and
mhm,
then where it was a field. How's this? Like one of these wells, and basically they've covered it with a slab, and then
mhm.
they've built on top of it. So there's people
Yeah.
sitting, with a well underneath their house, and they have no idea
No
that
idea.
that they have a well underneath their house. And then they had weird stuff, and they're like, "We're not close to water. We're not close to a river." And it's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, but you've got a well that they probably put a slab on, and then leveled it out, and you've got a house on top of it." And
Mhm.
because people they used to do that in the olden days, where they would keep wells close
Yeah.
by.
He's
Now
he's almost convinced that, someone died in that well.
that's possible.
That's why they were having so much. That's why they were seeing
Yeah.
faces, and that's why I got creeped out as soon as he was standing near it. I was, "Ooh, no,
A-
get away, get away, get away."
anything. One time I had a case where there was one room in particular, and this was a modern house. This was like, but over here, like in Florida, people will dig the wells in the yard so that they could put their sprinkler systems. So because if not,
Mhm.
it'll cost you a fortune.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they put one of these wells and then they'll just put a motor on it and they'll run the lines. And there was one room in particular. It was like the teenager of the, and it was like, and I'm thinking, okay, they have been there in this house for a while. And it's like, when did this start happening? And then on something, it was like, sure enough, I walked in there and I mean, we were doing an investigation and it was like, wait a minute. And I remembered that when we drove up, you know how some of these wells they have, well, here, at least here in Florida, they have iron. So sometimes if there's a sprinkler, you'll see the yellow on the
Mhm.
wall.
Mhm.
And I remember, wait a minute. When we drove up, I could have sworn up on that corner of the house was some type of yellow on it. That's iron. That's a well. Wait. I walked outside, sure enough, right there in the corner, because they had put it like on the side in that corner of the house where they dug it and they had the motor on it. And I looked at it and I said, and it was right, it was right next to the wall of that room. And I said, let me ask you something. When did you guys get that well put in? And you see, they're all looking at you like, what? They're like thinking, like, huh? I said,
Uh-huh.
well, 6 or 7 years ago, kind of. But did you ever have anything happen before you put that well in? And they're like, you can tell, you can see, when people's wheels are turning and they're looking
Right.
at each other and they're like, no, no. You know, they're like, they did. And
They had
sure
no
enough, then
idea.
when they start recollecting, because it didn't go from 0 to 60. It wasn't
Mhm.
like nothing's happening and then everything's, things are flying around.
Right.
But I personally think that it started back then. And as this girl that was in there, she went into pubescence, she became an adolescent. It took off.
Ramped it
And,
up.
and I don't think that per se it was a ghost, but
Mhm.
there was something connected as far as paranormal activity because of that well that was dug into the earth. And then it
Mhm.
just so happened that right next to the room of a girl that's coming into becoming a teenager, a girl of all
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
And I think that's why little by little it started making all these weird
Wow.
things. And
Yeah.
it was tight. And those people, you could have seen their faces were like, the well, what does the well have to do with anything? And it's like sometimes it's
But
stuff like
then
that.
you see when you ask people questions, you see the light bulb go off.
Yes,
They're like,
exactly.
"Oh."
Yes, yes, because they don't know the point of origin, especially if they've lived in this place for X amount of years. Like,
Mhm.
what was a trigger and what,
Mhm.
but so you got to walk them back a little bit, like do a memory walk down memory lane. Like,
Mhm.
because like I said at the beginning, some things are very scattered and they might not have even paid attention to it at the beginning.
No. Uh-uh.
People are busy, they're living their life.
Exactly. And, there even though there's all these shows on TV
Oh boy.
that talk I know.
Oh boy.
And we know those shows aren't real. We know this because what do?
Of
We
course.
sit in the dark and we hope for something like that to
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
no.
this is what I tell everybody. I said these shows, what is it, like a 50-minute, let's say if it's an hour, when you move out the commercials and all that.
Yeah,
But they're
40
in 50
minutes
minutes,
now.
they have to be entertaining,
Oh god,
you
yes.
know. And usually they're there like, first of all they have a production team and they have a producer and so they vet the locations
Yeah.
and they better have something to show for it because if not it's going to be a short-lived show.
Well, the Zach and his crew
Yes.
came into Lincoln County to work the old hospital. They
Okay.
blocked off 4 days
Yeah, say.
to make their 40-minute episode. And, that's highlights.
Yes, that's
All of that is
highlights.
highlights, including history, including the reveal, including all of the best parts of it. What people don't see is
Mm-hmm.
the setup and the walking through, trying to figure out, okay, now was that your footstep just then, or was that something that really did make a noise?
Exactly.
That kind of thing. Most of
And
all, we sit in the dark,
yes,
hoping
yes,
for
hopefully. And
something.
then you're that sometimes you're like,
And you Have you noticed too that when you guys start talking about anything but paranormal, like if you're just talking about something that happened at your house, a
Yes.
birthday party, and just start talking about blah, 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 that's when things start.
Because they're eavesdropping.
Hey,
They're eavesdropping. It's like,
hey,
what? Hey, they're not asking me what my name is. Wait, what? What did they say?
yeah, they're not paying attention to us anymore.
Yes,
Not.
yes, yes, yes. That or before, or usually after you put your equipment away or your stuff away. It's like,
Yeah,
now you're gonna do something? Now?
exactly.
Wow, that's great. Yes, that's how.
Exactly.
But like I tell everybody, I was doing investigations when you had to pay to develop film, so
Yes.
there wasn't that much reliance. So you did a lot of observation. How's that? Exactly what you said, which is where you use your body basically. And I tell
Mhm.
everybody, believe it or not, your body is one of
Is
the
your
best
best.
instruments there is,
It's your best.
especially after you tune it up a little bit and you do this work
Mhm.
for a little bit.
Mhm.
You you feel certain things, and it's happened to me and even on my team, where your body will feel it, and then the equipment will go off.
Yes.
Okay, but you'll be like, "Hey," and then whatever it is,
Uh-huh.
stuff like that. So but observation has a lot of value. Instead of, I understand about the equipment, I get it, and especially in one of these shows that they need to produce some type of proof or something that
Right.
can be, shown. But there's a lot of stuff that you have experiences that you can't record, or you just,
Mhm.
the like you said, the feeling, like I
Mhm.
feel,
Mhm.
something about this place. Let me ask you, that Fayetteville Hospital, was that just a regular hospital, or what kind of hospital was it?
It was just a regular
Was it a
hospital.
regular hospital?
It was actually before it was a hospital, it
Hmm.
was a college for teachers.
Really?
That's where they went to learn how to be a teacher.
Okay.
And before that, it was a boys' school. So
How far back does it go? What is it?
it goes back to the early 1900s.
Okay. Okay.
Um, the boys' school, I'm pretty sure, was early 1900s. The teaching school was through, let's see, the 20s into 1930, I believe it was. And then the teaching college moved to one of the Carolinas,
Okay.
to Erskine, I believe is the name of the school over there,
Okay.
and it became a Presbyterian college.
Okay.
So it became involved in that.
Eh,
The hospital was a different spot in town, so it moved there.
okay.
And over the years, there were at least three add-ons
Okay.
from 1930 up. It actually closed in 2001,
Really?
the
Okay.
day before 9/11.
Wow.
Really weird. Really weird. That was its final day. Now, most everything had already been moved to the new hospital,
Yes.
but that was the day they finally closed the old hospital.
One of the questions why I ask is that once upon a time, especially in the asylum, some hospitals did it. The staff used to live. They would have a building where the staff, the nurses.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
know that in some cases, mostly it was where the house, especially if they were like TB asylums where it was more remote. So you would have the staff like live on the grounds, like. And the reason why I bring that up is I tell everybody, especially when in asylums, everybody's looking at the crazy people running around or the TB. I go, there's a lot of drama that went on with the staff. You
Oh
know that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. In the stairwells
And
and
then, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you're thinking it's just the crazy people or the
yeah,
people that live it. That's
well,
they used to
those
live there.
doctors, yeah, and those doctors and nurses
Yes,
got kind of
yes.
friendly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's stuff
They,
there's with drama there, like,
oh
you
yeah,
know, jealousies, the whole nine yards. There's
literal soap opera.
yes, because of course they all lived there. It wasn't like they went home and
Hmm.
they come back the next day like what we're used to now, like you're gonna come back the next day.
Hmm.
So these liaisons and for sure. I said, how many, a lot of stuff went on there that God knows.
Yeah,
Some of that disappearing nurse, no, it wasn't the patients that did away with her. It was maybe the doctors like, oops, let me push you down the stairwell.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
One weird thing about that old hospital is there's five basements in it,
Wow. Like
and they don't connect.
they don't connect.
They do not connect. Mm-mm.
That is
The
weird.
oldest one is right in the center of the hospital, and that used to be the front steps to the college. And
Huh.
so then they built around that, and it became the furnace room.
And you would think though that they would be connected, like just to make it easy. So
None
you
of
would
them
have
would
five
be.
different entrances.
Yep, it's the weirdest. It's
Okay.
I tell you, where they did all the diagnostic stuff.
Uh-huh.
That is a maze. You can
Wow.
get lost just on that side of the hospital
Let
on the
me
first
out.
floor, just on the first floor.
Did they leave any of the equipment, or because I've seen
Oh
some of these
yeah.
hospitals that they leave
Oh yeah.
files, they leave equipment, it's like they like the staff got up and walked
Hmm.
out.
Yeah. There were even not diplomas but certificates
Yeah.
from some of the doctors that they had gone through a certain training or
Yeah, it's like
this
incredible.
just left
That
it.
I one time I did an urban exploration of an old prison here in Florida.
Ooh.
It wasn't that old. I mean, it stretches back to like 1900s,
Mhm.
and they closed it. Well, no, I take that back. Well, 19, no, 8, no, 2010, 2000, around that time. And
Mhm.
I remember there was this one building where I want to say there was, this is basically what they had the equivalent of, not the SWAT team, but if they ever had to, something went crazy in the prison. So I walk in there and they have these, remember once upon a time where everything was on paper?
Mhm.
I remember it was 2006 because the paperwork was in there was 2006. And I'm
Wow.
like opening up these file cabinets and they've got people's like files
Just
like
left there.
just left there. And I was like, what in the world? Sensitive, your personal information of employees. And I'm like,
Wow.
okay. And they had I mean, some of the other stuff doesn't care, yellow pages, who cares? But there was a bunch of stuff
You would
that
have
the
think
office
they
that
would
they
have
just left it there.
that
And
stuff you would think
yes,
they would burn that.
they would, they, or at least box it, take it away,
Yeah.
incinerate it, shred it,
Something.
something, and they didn't. So I know what you mean as far as that they up and walk away and just leave things like that. That's
Mhm.
incredible. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, I understand the employee thinking, but like I guess I'll take care of it. No, they didn't. But in part of it, I want to say sometimes what you get, and I don't know, Sin, if you've experienced it. You go into some of these places, it's not per se that they're haunted by a ghost. It's just the imprint on the fabric of the place, of
The
the
whole
life,
the energy.
what's gone on
Mhm.
there, especially if it's been there for a while.
Mhm.
That you walk on, that I want to say, even how sometimes if I felt somebody brush by me, I go, because sometimes that movement, let's say down a hallway, was constant. That I
Right.
want to say that place has almost like but it's not intelligent. It's not
Right. Right.
the guy that sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just, I
That
think,
the old hospital has both.
okay.
One of the residual spirits that
Mm-hmm.
we run across quite often is a nurse that wears that 1970s Avon floral perfume, the stuff that
Wow.
just they would
Yes.
bathe in, and you'd be like,
Yes.
"Whoo, Lord help us."
Yes. Yes. Avon
You
was big back then.
Yes, it was, and she wore it proudly.
Yeah.
And she has never interacted with any of us. We
Mm-hmm.
just smell her when she's around.
Because she might just be in this like doing her own thing. The
Yeah,
where her existence is, she has no that doesn't see
she just
outside
is
of.
doing her thing. She's
Yeah.
usually on the second floor around the
Okay.
OR.
All
So
right.
she was a nurse,
Right.
but occasionally she has been, I know, a couple of times down on the first floor. So probably going to HR for something, or going to supply room or pharmacy or something.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, she is there.
Yeah, but hospitals, I think, oh, the hospitals, there's drama just because of what happens,
Yeah, you've
you
got
know.
birth, death, everything in
Yes.
between.
Yes.
Car wrecks coming in. You're
Mm-hmm.
patching people up. Some people make it, some people don't. You've got all of that high and low. You've
Yes.
got the birth of a baby, or does that baby not make it?
Oh,
or
well,
did
there's
the mother not make it?
a lot of people don't realize that sometimes ghosts, whether they stay ghosts or not, is people that they die so suddenly, like either an accident or they're
Mhm.
anesthetized, let's say they're during surgery,
Mhm.
that they missed the memo, the part,
Yeah. Have no idea.
and they're like, huh? You
Yeah,
know,
what's going on?
yeah, it's not
One.
like somebody that's elderly or sick and they know that death is approaching.
Mhm.
Maybe
Mhm.
their last memory was driving in their car
Right.
and they had a
Right.
really very bad accident.
Yeah. You just never know.
Yes.
One of our little spirits is a little girl.
Okay.
Mark has actually talked about her before.
Okay.
She was about 5 years old. She died of an appendicitis,
Yeah.
and her parents were with her. Her parents were there, and
Mm-hmm.
they went to the funeral home to make arrangements.
Okay.
That's when the little girl spirit became aware that she was alone, and she
Oh,
thought
wow.
she had been left.
Okay.
And so that kind of traumatized her
Mm-hmm.
into staying. And she became friends with one of the nurses around the maternity area.
Okay.
So they were usually together.
There you go.
But
That's some of those things that, yeah, that they, especially for a child, I would say, whose
mhm,
understanding of death, even when they're alive, is very limited. They don't
mhm.
really understand the concept per se.
No, and then their parents are there and then they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So why did mama leave me? You
Right.
know.
And then you hear of people that have that they die and then they follow their body because they still don't get it. Either
Yeah.
they don't understand, they don't want, so they'll follow their body and they're trying to get back in their body, but maybe their body just is like, you're not getting back in, or it's been really hurt, like
Mhm.
destroyed.
Mhm.
So they follow the body to the morgue, and then they follow the body to the coroner, depending, or maybe to the funeral home,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then they end up following the body all the way to the burial site, to the cemetery, because they're like, I can't let it out of my sight. That's my body, that's
Yeah.
my body.
Happening.
Because
I'm trying to.
they're behind they don't get you're dead. And they can't get back in, but they're like, I can't, that's my
Mm.
body.
Yeah.
And
What are
they
you doing
say,
with it?
and like, and it takes, sometimes they say that's sometimes why you see in cemeteries. Some of them eventually they get the memo, or they see somebody. Um, but sometimes it's in cemeteries per se, they're hanging out because, hey, they put my body down there. So
Mhm. I don't
I'm
know
gonna
where to
hang out.
go.
I'm gonna hang out here until I figure this out. You know,
And
and yeah,
that's really scary a little, to think
yes, yes,
that
yes,
to have everything that you know taken away from you
yes,
and then
yes,
watch it as it's being taken away.
yes.
What how
Especially if you're, how's this? I want to say, especially if you're younger, how's this? Or
Mhm.
unexpectedly. Because when
Mhm.
you're older, or even if you're younger but you're ill or something that you expect, there's already, it's like, come on, it's already creeped. But if you're
Right.
young, you know how when you're young, nothing will ever happen to you kind of
Right.
deal,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Mhm.
That mindset is like, of course I'm not dead. How can I be dead? What? I'm
Yeah,
supposed to be around for another 60 years. What are you talking about?
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
They, and let me, and one of the things, the other day, and I don't know if they ever had that in your area, and I know where around the 1800s, I want to say like 1850s into the 1900s, they would have this thing where some of these unclaimed, not all the time, where they were stealing these bodies to sell them to
Oh,
the
yeah.
colleges
Yep.
for anatomy, the dissection.
Mhm.
And at one point, it was really funny, believe it or not, who a lot of times was their go-between in the hospitals? The
Who
janitors. The janitors.
really?
Yeah. The janitors would be the ones to give them a heads up on unclaimed bodies. First, it would go to unclaimed bodies because they usually knew this is going to go in the potter's field. There's not going to
Okay.
be any family that's going to come around, nothing like that. But if they were really hard up or they needed, a certain type, the janitor was the one that would tell it. Usually it was the doctor that ran like the medical department in the university.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they had like this thing, and then they would have the other people that the resurrection is what they call them, or body snatchers or whatever you want to call them, that the doctor would tell them, hey, you need to go out there and you need to get there's somebody getting buried out there
Wow.
today. And they would and I'm thinking to myself, this is also the ingredient for a haunting.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're if you're thinking, you seeing your body, if you're hanging out and maybe you're ready to leave, but all of a sudden your body's they would what sometimes they would do is they would either get a hook and either pull him out through their eye orbit or under here because they didn't want to
Oh,
destroy or hurt the body, because the body is
what?
and
Yeah.
they would put the ground all back up. They wouldn't like they would like tap down the ground, and hope that the sexton or whoever did the groundskeeping wouldn't notice. And usually, since it was just buried, the earth was disturbed to begin with. So that was
Oh.
a big deal as far as body snatching that went on. And they would be shipped out like like in those big barrels and stuff. They would
Mhm,
like
mhm.
scrunch them in there. They were making a lot of money on that. And I look at that and I'm like, I could see where this could cause a haunting really easy.
Mhm. Easy,
Really easy.
easy. Well,
Yeah.
that's a lot of times back in I think it was the 1800s,
Yes.
where they would put collars on the bodies so that nobody could take a body.
Yes.
Collar was put
Yes.
to the back of the coffin
Yes.
or
Yes.
the bars over the coffin
Yes,
and,
they would do a
different
lot of that. And they even had they usually had like the more expensive cemeteries would
mhm.
have like I guess the equivalent of a security guard
Yeah,
that was
but
out there.
they could be paid off
Oh
too,
yes, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. A lot of times, to them there was like, "Hey, the person's dead. Like, who cares? Yeah,
right?
I need to make my money." But yes,
Yeah,
there was this was a lot of money. People don't realize this was isolated. A lot of these cemeteries were doing this because these medical colleges were paying top
yes,
dollar for
yes.
the for bodies, and there's
There
only
was
so long that for the anatomy class. Yeah.
that reminds me, there was a big story about something to do with this, and, I wanna say it was a senator from the Midwest, uh, maybe up
Out of
around
Indianapolis, Chicago.
maybe,
Okay.
yeah, somewhere along in there, but it was a senator, and so his sons paid to have the body guarded,
Mm-hmm.
and they paid to have a concrete slab
Yes.
poured over the coffin,
Yes.
and they paid for other things,
Mm-hmm.
um, to get through the wake and make sure that the body was always watched, and they opened the coffin, make sure the father was still in there before they poured the concrete, blah 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 blah. Well, cut to a couple of weeks later, and they were called. There had been a grave robbery
Mm-hmm.
next to their the senator's grave. So
Right.
another grave had been disturbed, and they went looking for that particular body at this college. The first body they saw was the senator's.
I know that story. I know exactly
I
what
I
happened.
can't remember the name
I
though.
think it was I want to say it was Indianapolis or in that area somewhere. That
Mhm.
area. And you know what? I'm going to say real quick when you say that cement, a lot of people, do you really think it's coincidental why some of is you had to have the money even back then
Yeah,
why they had mausoleums?
right.
Because you could put the body in there and you could close it and they wouldn't have access to it. Or I don't know if you've gone to cemeteries, especially the older ones, where they have these vaults of cement. Like you're like, why do they have? And it's because back then, I bet you if you look at the burial date,
Mhm. Mhm.
it was mid to late, 1900. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, 1800s, where this was a real concern. It wasn't like Edgar Allan Poe stuff. This is for
Right.
real.
It was really happening.
The story on that is it. I'll tell you what. The guy that was stolen his son or his grandson ended up being president of the United States, last name of Johnson. Okay, and I want to
Okay.
say it was around Indianapolis.
I
This
I
it was in that.
Mhm.
Story
Mhm.
is the son, which is young. He's the future president. He's the young guy. They have a friend their age, but he has tuberculosis. All right. He's wasting away. And he dies. They bury him. A few days later, his father passes away. They go bury him. And somebody of the party of the funeral says, hey, they noticed that the young man that they had just buried, his dirt looks
Disturbed.
disturbed. Let's
Hmm.
face it. So they're thinking, so they open it. Sure enough, he's gone. So him and some cousins, all these young men,
Hmm.
I can't remember. It was a university that was
Yeah.
close by that they knew. And like, in other words, they had their suspicions.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they go over there. Guess who meets them? The janitor. Because the janitors were usually the
Yes.
ones, the janitor, and they go up, I think, to the fifth floor or the fourth floor, somewhere where they had the anatomy.
Hmm. Hmm. I
And
wish I could remember the name
it'll come
because
to me
yeah,
eventually,
yeah,
like probably after I finish talking to you. But
right.
anyway, so they notice that there's a body that's already, because they had like a pulley, like they were going to lower it.
Yes.
And they look at it, and one of them says, hey, are you sure that's not the young guy? And he goes, no, it's whoever's there is too hefty. My friend,
Hmm.
when he died, he was wasted away from TB. He was very slight, very skinny. And the other friend or the cousin that went with him says, but let's look anyway. So when they look, guess what? It was the father that they had just buried, which they had no idea. They were
Right.
looking for the young guy. They had just,
Wasn't the young guy in the barrel? One of
they
them
did find him.
was
Eventually, they
there.
did find him in a barrel.
Yes.
They were so wigged out with, like, what?
Hmm.
Their father, they had just buried their father. And yes, they did find the young man
You're gonna
in
have
a
to put,
barrel.
we're gonna have to put the name of this story in the notes for this show.
Yes, yes. And it was one, and then what happened was that town was so outraged because supposedly this cemetery was like for the wealthy.
Yes.
And they were like, what? They're taking our dead? Because when it was Potter's Field or nobody, it was like, oh, well, that's their problem.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
all the wealthy people of that area, they're like, what? They're taking our important graves, our important corpses dead, our family members. Like, they didn't
Hmm.
spare anybody.
Nobody. Mm-mm.
They took everybody.
And
Yes.
that concrete slab didn't do a darn thing.
Well, in some cases, people sometimes don't realize when they go to these older parts of the cemetery why they took the trouble to put those even cement things on the top of the.
Hmm.
And it was because of that, because grave
Hmm.
robbing was a real big problem.
Well, and
Eh,
yeah, not they might not steal the whole body, but they would get gold teeth. They would
But
get
oh yeah, the things. And
free, yeah, whatever they
now
wanted.
let's fast forward to modern times. Do you know there's a big trafficking now with human body parts, right? And I'm
Yeah,
not talking organ harvesting. I'm talking
right,
body parts.
right.
Okay, not only for medical purposes, but there's a lot of people that keep them as weird
Yes,
collections, right?
yes. Why? I don't know.
Every time I look at that, it's like that house. I would walk into those people's houses if they paid me $1 million. There must be having some really dark, malevolent stuff going on
Oh
there.
my gosh, you know they are. I mean, it reminds me of the worst horror movies.
Yes, and it's like, oh, that's yeah. Oh, I have the. They
Yeah.
had one guy they arrested. I laugh because you have to laugh. And they kind of knew that he had bought, and it's really funny because they advertised it on Facebook. So and they were doing the transaction through PayPal. So anyway, they get there, and I think one of the police officers, I can't remember if it was a state investigator, whoever, because I know it's like a federal, I don't know. He comes and the guy has the skull with a scarf around it. He goes, "That's my friend," and they're like the investigators are looking at each other like, "Is he serious? Like, is this guy crazy?" Or like, because they're like trying to figure out. But a lot of these people, they keep them, and how's this? It's not illegal. How's this? It's not illegal to have it. But the problem was that this happened like in Harvard. Harvard has their anatomy school where if you die, you can will your body or your family can give your body over for medical research.
Right,
Fine,
right.
there's no problem with that. Now, what happens is when they finish using it, they turn it over. They usually hire these different mortuaries to come and incinerate whatever's left of the person. Okay.
Okay.
And that's cool. I understand people saying, hey,
Mm-hmm.
make use of my body. But what was happening was the director of that part of the Harvard donation for 30 years, guess what he was doing?
I don't know.
He was turning around, he was selling these bodies as in the parts. And he even got together with one of the mortuaries that normally would come and pick up the body to incinerate them. And they were shipping bodies,
And
parts
we're
all over the United States.
and we're probably talking dark web stuff, right?
No,
That's dark. That's not even dark web stuff.
no, 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 no. This
Oh,
just broke. No, no, I'm
oh,
talking. No, there was one guy. He got prosecuted. As a matter of fact, like a year and a half ago, he had his and you know how it broke? I'm telling you, it's like that's why I'm saying the drama. This is all happening, right?
it's
This
crazy.
is all happening. This is one guy. Okay, he's a weird dude. If you find, let me see if I can find a picture of him.
Okay.
He has this museum called Memento Mori, and what he does is he has dead things,
Right.
dead whatever. You know, he's weird. When you get his picture, you'll go, "Holy crap, that's surprising." Anyway, he living with his wife. They have a bad breakup. Here we go.
Oh no.
Oh yes. So they
Oh,
break up. By the way, she was when he was doing getting all these weird stuff for his museum. It's all good, but the split I guess was not amicable. So she tips off the police that he's got buckets of body parts in his basement.
oh no.
Okay. So, and the way he had acquired them really is the problem. Okay. That's where the problem comes in.
Okay.
The way he had acquired them because basically they were sourced from a place where these bodies were meant to be cremated, not resold. Okay. So, what happens is, of course, that they start unraveling the case like where did you get these from? Because he was sourcing them and sometimes he was reselling them. This is how the whole thing blew up. And
Oh
they realized that one of the parts was the Harvard Medical School
wow.
gift. They have a certain name for it where people
Hmm.
gift the things. Like
Hmm.
it's one of those things like when you start pulling on it, it's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they found the mortuary assistant or one of the ones at the mortuary was same thing. She's selling body parts.
Oh my lord. And I
And you
wonder
look,
how much that happens. There's no
there
telling.
was around, I'll tell you what, I want to say like 3 years ago, there's a medical company that they lent out human heads for a show, for display, like a medical display. Okay.
What?
In other words, that in and of itself is not against the law, especially again, if people like donate their bodies.
Okay.
In other words, it's not,
That's
they
weird,
didn't,
but okay.
right, whatever, you're this type of person that the driver parks, I can't remember what park, I think it was in Denver, Colorado, somewhere. He parks his truck for a minute because he's transporting them back. Like, in other words, they lent them out for some type of show or exhibition or something,
Yeah.
and this driver's bringing these heads back. So he parks somewhere, I can't remember where. Next thing you know, somebody breaks in,
Oh no.
takes the
Oh
heads
no.
along with a dolly.
Oh no.
And I'm thinking to myself, and this is the question. Somebody had to know what was in that.
Yeah, and knew exactly where he would be.
Exactly. Exactly. That's my point. If you're gonna break into a truck and it has the name of the company is real innocuous. It's like medical something, but nothing that would lead you to believe. So in other words, it had to be somebody that really knew what
What
was
was
in there.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh my god.
And they were saying like the what do you call it? There's like a roster of prices of what different body parts.
Wow.
Um oh, here, hold on. Let me see. I'm gonna show
Oh
you.
my goodness.
And that's why when I read some of these old stories of these people like grave robbing, and
Yeah.
you think, oh, that was like back then. And I was like,
Well,
no,
it wasn't too long ago that Noble, Georgia, they
uh-huh.
had that guy, the mortician, was
Hmm.
supposed to be burning the bodies, and instead he was stacking them up outside as
That's
names.
another thing. I found that some I'm gonna hold on. Let me see if I can. Let me see. Hold on. Share screen. Let me see if I can. I can find this cuckoo bird because boy, he's a cuckoo bird to the nth degree. And when I looked at him, it's like, you know what? Why am I not surprised that? Oh, here he is. This gentleman's name is Jerry Pauly.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, mm,
Oh, yeah, that's the word for it. And he was the one that he was one of those that the original thing with the wife went south, and then that's and he had a I don't know if he still has it, a museum called Memento Mori or something like that. That supposedly this is why he was collecting all these body parts. And again, people don't realize that in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just how did you acquire it?
but usually when you say memento mori, you're talking
Yes.
about like hair from the dead that has been braided into a necklace or, something like that that's put on the
Hmm.
wall. But you
Yes.
think about arms and legs and heads.
They were saying that they have a price list of, let's say, just a head with a spinal cord, the fingers, the arms, like there's a whole roster, hearts, eyeballs, fingers, ribs.
Wow.
Hold on. And then you look at that, and that's why I was saying, can you imagine going to this guy's house? I'd be like, never, never,
Mm,
never.
no.
Yes. And
Wow.
this, I'll tell you what, this dates back to 2023. This was not that long ago.
Wow.
And I think he pled guilty like in federal because that I think it was because since it was shipped and received like over
Mhm.
like from
Over
different
state
state
lines.
lines,
Mhm.
it then the federal government, gets involved and was like trafficking in human remains or something like that. But I think I laughed when I started reading the story that the whole origin was, a dispute after the relationship breakup. It's like, there you go.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, and then that's how they led. Well, where did you get this from? And they find out that Harvard guy was part of the source of where they were getting the body parts from. Can you imagine
Oh,
all these nice people or whatever their intentions? They
yeah.
donate their bodies for medical purposes and little or the family. They were saying the families were outraged.
Well, sure. Because even though their family member donated the body, they expected it to go to
Exactly.
science.
It's like to them it's like if it's for medical purposes, it's not desecration, but what you did, it's like my aunt's I don't want my aunt's pelvis to be your lampshade. How's that?
Right. Yes. And you know, there are Etsy stores and all kinds of little
Yes.
stores popping up. Like when they have the oh, what are those? They're flea market oddities markets.
Yes. Yes. Yes, they
You
are.
they
Yes, they are.
actually have some real stuff.
Yes, yes. People think of that.
Mhm.
That's and again, it's not as morbid as it seems. It's not illegal. It's just where did you get that from?
Yeah, yeah,
You
usually
know?
though, like the oddities markets, they'll have like skulls of
Hmm.
birds or, animals,
Yes.
but
No, they
body
have a lot of
people,
human skulls and
yeah.
they people don't realize that even now, so many years later, human bodies, body parts, and let's not even go into the you know how they'll use body parts from a dead human for like let's say ligaments,
Yeah,
and
skin,
that by itself is like that's another huge
yeah.
there was one like a few years back. I want to say it was a multi-million dollar company, either out of New Jersey or something like that. And they were basically faking permissions to
No.
use reuse bodies, like when how they sell the different body parts, like the ligaments, like how people have like a knee
Mhm.
replacement.
Yeah, yeah.
That. And it's like, yeah, man, some people to them it's like the person's dead, they don't need it anymore. Why
Wow.
can't I make money off of it? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
people wonder why they've got problems in their house with haunting.
There you go. There you go. That's another thing that sometimes you think all these people that collect all this stuff is like, what in the world? I mean, I wouldn't come within like, I wouldn't even go in your yard. How's that? What
Can
do you
you
think about that?
imagine? Can you imagine being even a little bit aware that your
Yes.
body is being separated and taken
Yes.
to all parts. Can you imagine?
And even if you say, okay, maybe there is not attachment to everything, but just enough of it.
Just enough to know that your pelvis went to Aunt Mabel's and
Yes.
your head went over to,
Or it's like a decoration on somebody's coffee table,
yes,
because
yes.
that's what they do. That's what they do.
They took the top of your head off and you're now a candy bowl.
Yeah, candy do.
What?
Yes. You've got gumballs in there. So, yes. And that's why I'm saying I know that some of these people, it's like, holy crap. The vibes coming off of you and your it must be like hair raising,
Mm,
literally,
gotta be.
literally,
Gotta
literally.
be. Okay, so do you think that if you walked into one of these places, don't you know that you have to get some kind of feeling in the pit of your stomach that you shouldn't be there?
I'd be like, man, like get me. Where's the nearest exit?
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
w- I
Something's
would be
wrong. I
like
don't know
that.
what.
I would be like, no, 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 no. I am out of here.
Yeah, I don't
I'm.
know why, but
I don't know why, but I'm out of here.
yeah,
They
yeah.
talk about, and I'm going to say something else. Besides the obvious, which is, do you have any spirit of this person, their remains or whatever? Do you imagine the dark entities that followed this whole operation
No.
around?
Oh,
Oh,
and fed off of it
yes.
and keep
Yes.
feeding off of it
Yes.
because that's
Uh-huh.
what they do.
Yes. That right there is like that is talk about you're talking about non-human, malevolent,
Mm,
very dangerous entities that
mhm.
that whole trade in, and people say, don't be superstitious. I'm like, no, I'm not being superstitious.
No,
I'm
that's
telling you,
been re
that's the way it works.
no, that's
That
been real. That's what they feed off of, and that's what they're
hmm
going to get stronger with, and the
Yes.
more they are around it, and the more that that's being done, the more
Yes.
energy that creates, and it's all bad
And
energy.
it's all very negative. So, and that's why, you know what, and I tell everybody, because I know, like, especially for ghost hunters, people end up in the cemetery, and I said, you know what? Going to the cemetery is okay, as long as, of course, you're not trespassing. Because nowadays, once upon a time, people didn't
Right.
care, but nowadays they're more careful about when they closing their gates, the trespassing aspect. I said, do you know that there's a lot of people that do very weird invocations or do stuff or leave stuff there at cemeteries, and
Mhm.
there's very dark entities there that are not necessarily buried there,
Right.
but just ended up there because of went into the cemetery to do whatever it was that they're doing, even to
Mhm.
steal
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah. And
They
there's usually a guardian,
Yes, there is. Yes, there
but
is.
usually the guardian isn't the bad person.
No,
It's
usually
usually
these, I
what
would
you're
say, there- I usually refer to them as sentinels. All right. Now, this is my theory. This is what I'm
mhm,
based. Okay. Usually these sentinels are brought in by the grieving process. They don't bother anybody. They don't
right.
bother the people coming in and going. And they're usually drawn to a certain level of grieving, in a cemetery.
Mhm,
They're non-human and they hang out,
mhm,
and that's how kind of like what you said, what they feed off of.
mhm.
All right. Now, if you start messing with their thing,
Yeah.
you're gonna get them.
That's when there's trouble.
You're in trouble. You're in big trouble. All right. Good luck. You think you can do an exorcism or one of those deals? Good luck. Okay. Because once those things clamp onto you, they're yours.
Ye
It's all yours, baby. It's all yours.
yeah.
People don't understand. This is not a bargaining entity. This is not like,
Mm,
oh, no, no, no.
mm-mm.
That's why they don't mess with you. They're there because they feed off the grieving, of whatever is there. And sometimes they even hang out around, when cemeteries get full, sometimes you'll still have families coming in and stuff like that, but they still hang out. And it's like I don't see you and you don't see me. That's all good.
Mhm,
They're not
mhm.
going to mess with you.
Right.
But unless you start doing something you shouldn't. By the way, desecration of graves is one of them.
Mhm, mhm.
They become sentinels, not because they were really, but they're just hanging out because of what goes on inside the cemetery. You
Yeah.
know the, but I've heard people that that's why sometimes these what they when they go to cemeteries they come out with stuff that is like, man, what were you doing there? No, I was just visiting. I was like, really?
Really?
You sure you were just hanging out like trying to do a Ouija board thing? What? Yeah.
Mm.
And then there's the guardians, like you say, that there's sometimes there's guardians that people place there.
Hmm.
And then you'll have the regular old ghost of the dead persons that's like, well,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm having this great conversation with this guy next.
One of the little old curmudgeons, one of the little old, you know,
Yeah, there's people
men.
running around here all the time with
This
cameras
is
and lights, and it's like,
my
hey, here
grave.
comes another one.
This is my graveyard. Get out.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah,
Wasn't there
those.
at one point? Wasn't there at one point? And I don't know if this was 1800s or before. Um, but a black dog was usually buried in and or around.
Yes.
That's was it
As a sentinel,
cemetery?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
it was like a yeah,
Okay.
just the same as have you heard that they would bury people in the foundations of buildings or houses
Yes.
or bridges as a guardian? The same thing. They would which is where a lot of these stories about the black shuck and the black dog and the black this and the black that. I think that's
Hmm.
part of the origins of it, where
Hmm.
the idea or the intention was to keep it there as a guardian.
Right. Right.
All right, from desecration, from somebody doing
From
something they
anybody.
shouldn't.
Yeah. From anybody trying to
Yeah,
do something they shouldn't.
yes. People don't realize that besides the medical aspect, human body parts are used for a lot of occult things. A lot. More than people
Hmm.
realize. Besides
Hmm.
graveyard dirt, real graveyard dirt, that's used a lot in hoodoo and conjure and root work. Real, this is a story. Um, One of my son's ex-girlfriends, this was a long time ago. He's already married, and this was a while back. She's young. They had rented a house across the street from this very old cemetery in Miami. All right. Let's put it this way. It was so old that the fence around it was like 3 feet high,
Oh
like
yeah.
built, of stone. Like it was like very old. It's in the middle. Probably, I don't know how far, but probably was built. It was way out in nowhere. By the time she was there, it was in the middle of the city kind of deal. It
Okay.
was very big. So, and I've been there. The back of the cemetery had a little road, and then the houses were right here. Old Miami homes. So she moves there with her family, four sisters. Her dad was a truck driver, so he would be gone like long time. Who
Hmm.
lived was their mom, her maternal grandparents, her and her three. She was the oldest of the four daughters, right? And they all stayed in the same room. So she says every once in a while we would hear weird stuff going on in the closet, like noises and stuff like that. Or the closet door would open by itself, and they were already getting creepy feelings already. She says one night, she says the hallway to their bedroom had, I guess, like windows. And she says that one time she hears like a noise, like coming like from outside, like the hallway, right? But
Hmm.
she says their mom left the door, would always leave the door open to their bedroom. And she says she's looking, and she says she sees something crawling along the floor down the hallway coming to their room,
Ooh.
but it's very low to the ground. And she says that for a minute there, she says she looked, she goes, I was even thinking, was that my dad coming back from a trip? Like playing
Yeah.
but she kind of makes like a human face kind of out. But when you're a kid, you're just, and she's thinking, is this my dad trying to like play a trick on us? Like he's
Uh-huh.
crawling along the floor trying to play with us,
Hmm. Trying to scare us.
trying to scare us, and he came back from one of his trips. And she says as this thing is coming along, there's a little bit of ambient light coming in from the window in the hallway. That's how she's kind of able to see a little bit of it. And she says as it's crawling along, she realizes that it's a human body, kind of skeletal, but it's like got the inverted elbows and
Hmm.
kneecaps.
Hmm.
That's why the body is very low to the floor,
Ooh.
but it's crawling along the hallway, coming closer and closer to their room. And she says all of a sudden, she just like yells like, "Wah!" Of course, everybody, her grandparents, her mom, everybody comes running. And of course, like everything, it disappeared.
Yeah.
And she says that they didn't stay there long. Something happened that not too long after that, but, and I told her, I remember her name is Julie. I said, you know what? I bet you anything that had to do something with that cemetery. That was basically you crossed the street and it was right there.
Hmm.
Because that was such a weird and like
Yeah.
odd thing to see. And she
Yeah.
says that she goes, I remember I woke up and my sister's all asleep and I kept looking at it. She says it's getting closer. She's kind of seeing more details. And then she says that when she realized, like, what? It's like a human kind of, she says it was very like dried out, like human, but like skeletal. And
Hmm.
it's crawling basically along the floor. I'd be like, oh man. And I'm thinking that has to have done something. That I'm positive that had to have do something with that cemetery that was right there.
Uh-huh.
How
Somebody disturbed something.
something, yes.
Yeah.
And it just went over there, and I was like, man, that's one of those stories you'll never forget. And it was
Mm-mm.
like, yeah. So sometimes cemeteries are weird places. You know, once upon a time when there were parks and everybody would just hang out and do,
Right.
those older ones.
Yeah.
But still, some of those other ones that even now it's like, yeah, when I tell everybody you go into cemeteries, you got to be a little bit careful when you go there.
What
Besides, you
makes
might
you
run into
wonder
people.
the way that one showed up if it was not human?
No, I'm thinking it might not even have been human. It
Yeah.
might have looked like it was human, and it might not have been human. Who
Uh-huh.
knows? Who
Right.
knows what the origins on that was? And I
Right.
was like, I'm glad your parents or whatever moved away from it. It was like a rental. And I think later on she told me that I think it was either her mom or her grandfather. Somebody had talked to one of the neighbors.
Hmm.
This is an old part of Miami, so the houses there were older. And somebody said, "Oh yeah, no." And it's one of those where you could tell that the road at one time had been real narrow because when they expanded it, the road is like right next to the wall of the house.
Yeah.
So you could tell that when it was built, everything was real narrow. And I think she had told me that somebody had said, "Oh yeah, that place. There's always people coming and going on that rental all the time. That house, yeah,
Yeah,
all the
they
time."
can't handle it then. Yeah.
It makes you believe that yeah, there's stuff that's going on that people.
Hmm.
It's not the whoever is getting a preview, and I would say yeah, I'd run out pulling my hair out if I saw something like that. Like what in the no.
Yeah. And whatever it is staying there.
Oh yes,
It's
yes,
there.
yes, yes, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
you either.
And I say sometimes, some of these cemeteries, especially when at the very beginning, sometimes for all you know, before they actually put up that stone fence, they might have even had graves that extended out further.
Yeah.
That might have even been under that they built the houses on. It was like,
Mhm.
okay, that cemetery went up to there. Okay, well, I don't care. We're just gonna put the fence here and say this is where it ended, and nobody will know because they need to build these houses here.
I mean, well, think our whole country,
Yeah.
we're probably built over
Yes.
graves.
Yes. I believe it. I think that,
I think so too.
well, there's always, in the cities and as they grow into, you always have the official cemetery.
Hmm.
But even
Hmm.
where I live at, you have a lot of family or little community
Yes.
cemeteries.
Yes.
And then, let's say we're talking older times, people move away, they forget.
Hmm. Hmm.
And back then, most of the times, the markers that we put would be made of wood. Not all the time, but sometimes that wood
Disintegrates.
disintegrates
Hmm.
and it's gone. And like you said, nobody knows that, oh, yeah, back there was a cemetery. There was a little family cemetery, or there was a little town that was out there, and there, whatever.
Or a dam is made and they
Yes. Have you
flood
heard of that?
here. Yeah, a lot of times I know when they did the one close to here, they tried to relocate as many as they could, and the families that reached out to them, they could
Mm-mm.
move them, but
Yes.
others that didn't reach out or their families maybe had passed on, their
Yes.
lineage was
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
Those were left,
Yeah.
and
There's nobody, if there's no, that's why they say that even in these bigger cities that that basically the city grows so much or they have so many dead that they realize, hey, we need to move it, or that land is too valuable. Now we want to build on it.
yeah, yeah.
They said people don't realize the city management, they're
Mm-mm.
pragmatic. They're like, yeah, yeah, we need to show that we're moving these graves, but hey, don't worry
Right.
about it. Just
Yeah,
get them out of here. Get them out of here.
and which is terrible. I
Yeah.
know, there's a story from one of Mark's Chattanooga Chills books talking about, when they first started working on the downtown Chattanooga area,
Okay.
where pretty much where the aquarium is now in Chattanooga.
Okay.
but they bulldozed Native American graves into the river.
There, see.
They just, well, not bulldozed because they didn't have
Yes.
bulldozers back then, but
Yeah.
they just pushed these Native
Yes.
American graves into the river and
Yes.
then wondered
Why stuff was
why
going on?
there was always a leak somewhere
Really?
or
In the aquarium in
yeah, or
wow.
outside in a specific place.
Yes.
There was always
Wow.
water damage. Why? Well, you did it.
Exactly. Well, there was one this I want to say was this 2015, 14, around that time. This San Francisco. And of course, they had their cemeteries and they had that same thing where they had put the cemetery originally and then San Francisco exploded and then they moved them out. But bottom line, there's a couple or a family, I'm sorry. They owned this house and was it a pool? No, I take that back. They're doing something in their garage, something that required
Digging.
the concrete breaking.
Yeah.
So they take the moment to like we're gonna take like a little family trip, like let these workmen do their work. They get a call. They found a child in a one of these lead coffins, sealed tight. So since it was airtight, they had put like a little glass, in front of her. And
Oh
since she
my.
was sealed in there airtight, she looked like she was sleeping. She was sleeping. The blonde, the curls, everything. She even had like a little. They had put like a little necklace. I can't remember what flowers they were. They
Wow.
had put everything. Like she was perfectly preserved.
Yeah.
And they were saying that because of the way she could tell that the first of all that you needed money to have that kind of
Yes.
casket,
Yes.
and also the way she was dressed, they could tell this family they had some type of money. This wasn't.
Hmm.
They were talking about how supposedly all these graves that were moved were didn't moved.
Hmm.
What they found was the once they opened it, disintegration started immediately.
Yeah.
So finally, they buried her with unidentified because they couldn't. And finally, these genealogists and they took the old map of the cemetery and they finally were able to track down the family who she belonged to. And
Wow.
they found a great great grandnephew or somebody that still lived out in California. And they gave her like a headstone and it was really nice.
Oh.
And apparently she had there was a disease called not Erasmus, something like that. That it was like a wasting disease that children got where even if they ate, they wouldn't get nourished. So
Hmm.
basically, she just wasted away. But if you see the pictures of this little girl inside the coffin, she looks like she's sleeping. She looks like a doll.
Wow.
But
Wow.
the point that they were making was that, the poltergeist movies, like you didn't move the bodies.
Yeah.
That happened a lot, more than people think. As far as
It still does.
that
You know, you
because it
remind
cost
me.
them money. Well, it would cost them
Yeah.
money to move all those graves.
You
Yes.
know, that reminds me of there's a story about a little boy over in Europe that his parents were devastated that he died young.
Mm-hmm.
Well, his sisters ganged up on him and pretty much killed him.
Oh,
So they were jealous of him. And
oh,
so the parents devastated. I want to say his last name is Longkey or something like that. But
okay.
it's in Mark's Dahl book, the
Okay.
book he wrote, Darkest Corners.
Yes, I know which one you're talking about.
Okay, this little boy, they were so devastated that they had him preserved
Oh,
and put into a glass casket,
wow.
dressed and makeup, the whole bit, so that they could see him every night.
Did they know that they're how he died?
I think they found out,
That's horrible. Let me tell you something.
and yeah, that it was over jealousy of their little brother.
Let me tell you
And
something. I'd be like
this
looking at my kids like, oh, children of the corn? Or is that
right.
what you are?
Well, this
What?
was back. This was back 16 or 1700s.
Yeah, but still,
So
that's pretty like,
it was
God, that's
part.
so
Mhm.
dark.
Yes, and they were nobility.
Right, but yeah, it's still, and well, you
Mhm.
know what? If he was the only male heir, they were the females. They must have been like, back then. People
Mhm.
don't realize that. this thing of primogeniture, which is, that insistence of that the male heir was
Right.
that they didn't want to break up their properties. In other
Yep.
words, that you would say if they had, let's say, three sons, why didn't they just divvy up and say, I'll give this to you and you and you? And
Hmm.
it was because back then land meant so much that they
Hmm.
didn't want to divide it up. So that's why they had that thing where the firstborn
Right.
had to would get everything. And
Right.
if you were second and third in line, it's like, well, I guess you'll be, well, you'll be a soldier and you'll go for the church, or one of
Mhm.
those deals,
And the
because there
daughters
was,
got married off.
or yeah, and the girls, of course,
Yeah.
but that was why the big deal, because you always think, I was like, man, why didn't just divvy it up amongst your sons if that
Mhm.
was the thing?
No.
No,
Mm-mm.
because the thing was to preserve, and if you could add land, even more so.
Yeah.
That was like a big deal. So yeah, if you got rid of that boy, then no wonder. And have you seen those? And I think Mark did in his book. That Victorian, that thing where they would take the pictures of the people and that had died and the
Yes.
children.
Postmortem photography. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
I actually, and I cannot find it anymore, but when I was little, I found in my grandmother's um, storage area, and
right,
she was still with us. We were actually living in her house.
okay,
So I found this old photo album, and there were a couple of pictures of babies that had died.
wow,
And
yes,
I had never seen that,
that's
and
like
for a kid to see, oh my goodness, you took a picture of a dead baby,
right.
but
Is
that
that
was,
people don't realize that back then it's not like now we have photographs,
mm-mm.
especially if it's a child,
And that was probably the only
the
they
only picture that
had.
you would have of them.
Yeah.
Yes, when you see that, to us it's morbid, but it's you know
Mhm.
same thing as you hear about these people. Oh, somebody so and so died. I go, once upon a time that was the norm. People would die at home.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
people would die at home. If you
That's,
had a disease or if you were old,
mhm.
you would. It wasn't
And
like
it's
you're going to the
true.
hospital. You die at
No,
home.
and a lot of
Remember, doctors
people.
will make house visits. You know that, right?
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. No, that's
I'm
what.
old enough to remember those.
But that's the thing. Everybody thinks, oh well, how that's so weird. Somebody died in the house. I said, you know
Yeah.
what? People,
Mm-mm.
especially if they had a disease or they were, they had something, and the doctors would come to see you at home,
Right. Right.
and your family would care for you,
Hmm.
and you passed away at home.
And
That was not.
that's one of the things that a lot of the older people ask for. Well, just take me home to die.
Yes,
Just
yeah,
let me go home in my
yeah.
bed. I want to die there.
Well, the equivalent of, how somebody, if they're ill, the hospital say, look, we can't do, you got to put them in hospice, this person.
Hmm.
Sometimes people would linger a year, 2 years, depending on what was wrong with them.
Yes.
They would die at home, and it wasn't, how can I say it, we look at it with our modern day sensibility and we're like,
Hmm.
what?
Right.
But
Right.
back then, just like people used to have babies at home too.
Right. Exactly. And
Yeah.
did you know Mark's mother hung on to die? Did you know that story?
No, 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 no.
Oh, well, Mark's mother was very ill,
Okay.
and she had just been given like 3 days to
Okay.
live. They said, get everybody in here to say goodbye to her.
Hmm.
And Mark could not get, or they could not get one of his brothers
Okay.
and the nephews. Now, the
Okay.
nephews were um, mentally disabled.
Okay.
And so they were scared of things like that.
Yeah, there's people
And
that, yeah, I understand
yeah,
that. I
very,
understand that.
very touchy. Well, his brother was also didn't want anything to do around death.
Yeah.
Couldn't go talk to her, nothing.
Yeah.
So then she was hanging on for about 3 weeks, and the nurse asked Mark, "Is there anybody she could be waiting on?" And he said, "Yeah, I can think of a couple." And she said, "Get him on the phone." And so
Yeah.
he called his brother and said, "Look, I'm going to hold the phone next to mom's ear. You just
Hmm.
talk, just tell her you love her, and
Right.
that's all you have to do. You don't have to come."
Yes.
So he did that. Well, they called Mark's nephews,
Okay.
had them do the same thing, and they spoke to their um, great aunt, or
Hmm.
I think that's how it was. But
Right.
anyway, they spoke to her told them that they loved her. And it was not very long after that that she took her last breath. That's
Yes,
all
that was
she
what
was
she was
waiting
waiting
on.
on. And then
Hmm.
you hear the reverse. You hear about people that the person kind of waits till everybody goes to lunch or goes
Yeah, and
home
then so they
for a
can go to
bath or
sleep.
something like, oh, okay. And then
And
they did pass away. Like they like
hmm yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they, it's like, okay, oh thank God you let me just I'm gonna go because
It's
I don't
like
want to
an
hear you
animal.
all
It's like an
crying and
animal, when a cat or
yes,
a dog gets sick,
yes.
they try to hide.
They go out by
Yeah.
themselves, yes.
Yes, and
Hmm.
that's a very real thing.
Yes, with humans, sometimes it's the opposite. They want to
Mhm,
be alone, and it's like, and sometimes I think it's like everybody that's important is there,
mhm.
and it's like, you know what, they're hanging on there, and they just like, okay, you know what, I'm go home, and when you
Right.
go home, I'm gonna take that opportunity to get
Mhm,
out of here. And
mhm.
by the way, that you also hear now that you were talking about hospitals, there's some great ghost stories about people that work at hospitals,
Yeah,
especially either oncology or where they have the older patients or people they you hear these stories about these nurses, especially the ones like the overnight shifts
right.
where they have
Mhm,
shadows or there's a certain room
mhm.
or they'll say, oh, we see certain things and like we know that patient is the one the next that's gonna be like bye bye, even though
Yeah.
the prognosis is not like they're on death's door, but
I've heard a couple of nurses say that they have seen the death angel or the
there we
angel
go.
of death. I've also one of my friends. He's a couple of years older than me. He was a nurse for years and years and years, and he actually worked at the old hospital. He was in
Okay,
ICU one night, and one of their patients was an old little old man, and he was very ill.
okay,
He wasn't expected to make it very much longer. His wife was being cared at home,
okay,
and one night David heard him speaking, and he went over and I'll just call him Mr. Smith. He said,
right.
"Mr. Smith, what's wrong?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just trying to get my wife to just come sit down. She's standing. I want her to sit down on the bed and talk to me." And David said, "Well, there's nobody here right now." And he said, "Well, she's right there. Honey, come here, sit down. Sit down on the bed and just talk to me." So David just left him just to be alone in his thoughts and dream and vision, whatever he was seeing. And they called and let them know about the time that he was seeing his wife. She
Wow.
died.
Okay, there you go.
She died at home. She had come to visit to tell him
Wow.
she was going. She'd wait for
Uh-huh.
him. He died very soon after that.
Yes. And then most people think
Hmm.
there was another one time I was conducting the tour, so people come and tell you stories. There's this one
Hmm.
guy comes up to me. He's a nurse or CNA. I can't remember what hospital it was, but it was like the overnight thing. So he says, usually at night it's real quiet, you know,
Hmm.
you do your rounds, but everybody's quiet. And I want to say it was either older people. I can't remember what the setting was, but it was just. And he says we're like the staff is not that much, but they're like around the nursing station. He says all of a sudden we hear this scream that we're like, what in the world? He says first of all the patients were like older, plus they were like all tucked in.
Yeah.
And he said he was like the only guy. He was a nurse, but he was the only guy. And they had like, and they said that they looked at each other, and he's like, and I guess it had, one of those U things like where you go like this, and then the
Yeah.
nurse's station is
And
over
they're
here,
like, I'm not
and
going.
he's like,
I'm not
I'm
going.
not going by myself. Because they're looking at him like,
Like
and he
he's the
says,
only guy.
yeah, and he's like, no, I'm not going by myself. And he says that he's like, okay, one of you's got to come, one of you stay here at the station, and one of you come with me.
Yes.
Like, and he's like, and he says they went room to room to room to room to room. There's not, they couldn't find it, and they said that it was like a scream, like there was no mistaking it. It wasn't like it came from the outside. Plus, it was like on a third or a fourth floor. Like man, if something
Wow.
travels that far up. And he says that the rest of the night, if they had to go do their rounds, it's like I'm not going to come with me. They
Oh,
took one or
yeah.
the other, and it took a while for them to get away from it. And they could never explain what
What
the
had happened?
origins of that was, but it was like, nah, I'm not going by myself. I don't care. Yeah, I'm the guy, but I'm not going by myself.
I have a couple of hospice stories in my first
Okay.
signs book,
Okay.
and it's from my friend Katie. Her mother was a hospice nurse
Okay.
around the Houston area. And so she wrote one night, she was working with her supervisor,
Right.
and it was just the two of them. And one of the call bells started going off, and it was the empty room.
Oh
She knew
boy.
it was an empty room. And so she got up and thought, what in the world? And went back, turned the light off, came back and sat down. And then within 5 minutes or so, it started going off again. So she goes up, she goes back. Something is wrong with this bell. So she called and she said, maintenance needs to be made aware that this call light keeps going off in room so and so. And the her supervisor said, "What room?" And she said the number again. She said, "Okay." She said, "Well, next time it happens, just walk down the hall, put your hands on your hips, and say, 'Go to bed.'"
Oh.
And so she did. It went off again, and she went down the hall. It was about 2 in the morning, and she put her hands on her hips. She said, "Go to bed. It's 2 in the morning. Go to sleep." And she went back up, and then she called and she said, "What? Why did you
Right.
tell me to say that?" She said, "We had a little 8-year-old girl pass away not
Wow.
too terribly long ago, and occasionally she comes back to visit, but she always liked to play with her call light."
God.
So that happened.
Yeah.
Another one from her mother was one night. They had it was in ICU, and they actually even had a baby that was not
Hmm.
expected to make it.
Right.
So it was pretty much a full unit at this point, and the baby was closer to the nurse's station. Well, they heard, and all of these patients are either comatose by drug inducement,
Right.
to keep them from pulling out anything, or
Yes.
they are just medically in a coma for
Yeah.
whatever reason and just
Hmm.
waiting. They're pretty much they're
Yes.
waiting for these patients to be as comfortable as possible until they pass on. That's what they do. And so one night they heard this strange noise, and somebody started screaming, and it was one of their patients. And
Okay.
they went down, and the nurse aide called and said, "I need help. Mr. So and so's climbing out of his bed."
Right.
"There's no way Mr. So and so can climb out of his bed. He's in a coma." Well, she got down there. Mr. So and so was trying to climb out of the bed. So they calmed him down, got all the tubes and everything put back in. He's out
Okay.
immediately. The next rooms, it starts the same thing. They go fix him. And each time, the nurse is like going up to check on their medication. Maybe they need something else to calm down. Let me look in their chart
Right.
real quick. By the time she comes back, they're out again. Okay. It
Okay.
goes and goes and goes. About three of these people happen. Finally, the nurse realizes something's going through these people, and the
Yes.
baby's next. And so
Okay.
she goes and stands in front of the baby's room and says, "No, whatever you are, you leave this baby alone." And she said she felt the coldest
Wow.
thing rush through her body
Oh.
and past her. And then everything got quiet again in the hall. She
Wow.
called down and she said, "I don't know what just happened, but three of our comatose patients came awake one after the other, and they were crawling out of the bed. They ripped all of their tubes out. They were coming unglued and getting up and out of their bed."
Wow. That's and then
The
that's what a
nurse
coincidence.
the nurse said, "Well, let me tell you what happened just a few minutes before. So maybe this is what it was. We had a gentleman in the emergency room He was in a horrible, horrible situation. He was dying. There was
Okay.
nothing we could do for him, and he was in excruciating pain. And he died. Right before he died, he let out a yell, and they said it was just like a blast. They just felt a blast. That's the only thing we can think of. He came up and
Yes.
through the people before
Yes.
he was about to go through that baby, and the nurse stopped him, and then
Wow.
he was gone.
That's very possible. I've heard of that.
That's terrifying.
Yes. I think especially when somebody that last moment, whether it's the pain or the unwillingness, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's just trying to find. There was one where same thing. These are older patients,
Mm-hmm.
and I say the overnight is. I want to say because when things are more quiet
Right.
and there's running around,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a nurse, and she. I think it was only two of them, and they have a room where they have two older ladies. One of them does the buzzard.
Mm-hmm.
And she says usually these patients when they're in bed, that's it, they're in bed.
Right.
So she goes over there and she's awake and she's like, the man, there's a man, there's a man. And she's like looking around and she's like thinking, okay, sometimes they'll say they'll see things or she's like,
Right.
no, there's nobody here. Don't worry about it. Blah, blah, blah. Just go back to sleep. Go back to sleep. Goes back a few minutes later. The buzzard of the lady next to her, she said, by the way, her neighbor at that time was still sleeping, goes off. So she walks in there. And this lady's saying, oh my God, that man, get rid of that man, that man. And she's like, wow, okay. Maybe this one heard the other one talking about
Mm-hmm.
the man and she's not
Right.
picking up on the man.
Right.
And then she's like, no, there's nobody here. And then the other one says, yeah, he's in the bathroom. And she says that all of a sudden she hears like something moving or somebody's in the bathroom. And she's thinking, holy crap, somebody got up here, came into their room, and they went into the bathroom when they heard me coming. So she
Mm-hmm.
called security, like, I need you up here, like yesterday, because
Right.
I think I have an intruder in here. So sure enough, security guard goes up there, and she says she goes, I heard like movement inside that bathroom. So she's like, look, they're telling me I don't know, it's might be a man, I don't know. So the security guard is ready. They open the door, nobody in the bathroom, nothing. She
Wow.
was like, she goes, I know that there was the movement was not like, oh, like a little noise. It sounded like there was somebody in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there they were. And of course, she didn't take them at their word because she's thinking they're just seeing things.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know,
They're
they're
older.
saying the man, the man, the man. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, you ask yourself, maybe there was no way for her to know. Was it one of those scenarios that you just talked about? Or maybe a floor below or in the
Mm-hmm.
ER,
Mm-hmm.
somebody had come in that was
Yeah.
walking around that was like, I'm not ready to go or I'm going to hang out here or things like that. Oh yeah,
Then you also have peaceful ones too, though,
yes.
because the same lady sent me this one. She, at this point in time, had to give tours of her facility.
Okay.
So they were moving, a family wanted to move their loved one in for his last few weeks. And so this woman was giving the tour to this lady, which
Right.
ended up being the patient's daughter. And so she was taking her all over, and there were 3 floors. And
Right.
so they would start, and she would go through, and oh, this is where we do laundry. So you can do your loved one's laundry, or you can have us do it.
Right.
Whatever, doesn't matter. Either way, whatever's easier. And this is where we do our meals. If you would rather them have something else, you can bring something, or we can have something special made if we've got it. Just being really, really sweet and showing her the whole facility. And she was going up back to the 3rd floor where her office was. And right as she got almost to the top, she felt something
Okay.
come through the door and heard footsteps. And she actually moved out of the way because
Okay.
she had heard it, and she looked to see if the woman with her had heard it, but she was still talking like
Right.
she was just had no clue of anything else going
Mm-hmm.
on. But whoever this was walked down the steps past them, down the second level,
Okay.
down to the first level. Before she got to the door and opened it, she heard the first floor door open and close.
Wow.
And so she goes in, goes back to her office, finishes the tour with the lady, tells her if you have any other questions, la da 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 da, and we'll see you when we see you, and ended the tour. The lady left. She goes to her friend in the next office and said, I just had the weirdest thing happen. And it was as we were coming up from the tour,
Right.
I heard the door and something came through it and I heard footsteps. And they said, Mr. Jones just died.
Oh,
And it was right by the stairwell.
right.
So
Exactly.
he
He was
was just
leaving.
leaving.
He was
Yeah,
leaving.
he was leaving the
And it's
building.
surprising because she's attuned to it and she hears it, but this other lady has no
Had
idea.
no idea. Nothing.
Like, like, yeah, which I think sometimes when you work in that settings for a while, you kind of like tune into those things.
I think you kind of have to. It's
Yes.
either, okay, I'm going to have to ignore all of these noises I'm hearing, or I'm going to acknowledge them and just know that they are around.
There's a lady, I'm not going to use her name because she now she works as a medical intuitive, but she her whole life she was a doctor. And she says the story how when one time she was doing her residency somewhere, either New York, Boston, one of these big hospitals, right? She says, you know what? She says there's always two or three nurses that she says how she would say she goes they're usually she goes they're a little bit overweight. They're this she described it. She goes, and God, they knew. She goes, I would they would she would do like the equivalent of doing the rounds on these patients, and she says they would know who was going to die. She says they knew it whenever, or they would come up to him and they go, hey, Mr. So and so or whoever, you need to keep an eye on him or something. She says at the
Hmm.
beginning she didn't pay attention to it. She was like,
Hmm.
she says
Right.
after a while, she says, they knew it. She goes, because they would call it on patients that there was nothing, that they were imminently sick or that they were about to pass on or anything.
Hmm.
And they would say there was a couple of these nurses that were so in tune that even despite it, because in other words, if they're expected to die, it's like, oh, no big guess. So you
Yeah.
already know that that patient's going to be dying.
Yeah.
They would they would give me these heads up about the patient that was going to be, and she says, and normally within 48 hours the most, that person would pass on.
Hmm.
And he
Hmm.
says that they were like a deathometer.
Yeah. You've
And
got
so,
those. You've
yes.
got those.
And she goes, I learned that. She goes, I learned that when I was doing my residency that there's something that they catch on,
Hmm. Hmm.
whether, I don't know what, that even the person themselves is not expecting that they're going to die, but there's
Yeah.
something that goes on, maybe on a metaphysical plane,
Hmm. Hmm.
that there's this, what do you want to call it, the angel of death, or something's going to
Yeah, or
happen.
something. Mhm.
Yes.
My friend Debbie out in Washington State, I actually got to work with her for a summer, and I'm trained as a physical therapy assistant.
Okay.
So I went out and I was working with patients in her facility, and Debbie told me a story about when she had first started nursing in that facility. And she had a little lady at the end of the hall, sweet little lady. Everything was fine. She heard her talking one night. And so she kind of stood outside her door and listened to her. And she was saying things like, oh, yes. Oh, that'll be fun. Oh, okay. Oh, I can't wait. That's going to be so fun. It'll be good to see her, different things like that. So she
Right.
came in and she said, who are you talking to? And she said, my mama. Now, this was a little old lady,
Right. So
and
you're there. Okay.
her mother had been dead several years. So
Okay.
she said, oh, okay, okay. Well, I'm going to take your vital signs and then I'll let you continue having your chat with your mom. And she said, okay. And so she took her vital signs. Everything was in normal limits. There was
Okay.
nothing. Her oxygen was fine. Her blood pressure was fine.
Okay.
Her pulse was fine and strong. Her breath was strong and even, and nothing
Hmm.
was out of place. And she said, "Okay, everything looks good. I'll come to check on you in an hour." And she said, "Okay." Left the room, came back and did her rounds an hour later. That little lady was dead.
Wow. See what I mean? What a cool. And here she's talking to her mom.
Yes.
And again, and you're thinking there's nothing here that's like an indicator like quick,
Yeah. And nothing was wrong. There was not racing of the heart. There was
right?
nothing.
Something
Nothing.
that's
Hmm.
which yeah, I'm telling you that sometimes things like that. And I remember what there was this story, and I can't remember what hospital it was. And they said it was like a bigger hospital where they had multiple beds, but they said there was this one room that they said that they would never use. In other words, they would only use that room when they had no other
Oh,
choice.
yeah.
All the beds were filled, and then they would use that one room. And normally it was because they had a high frequency of deaths and because weird stuff would happen there.
Okay.
And it was like the room, like don't put like all the nurses were like don't put anybody in there because I don't want to go in there to see the patient. But sometimes they were forced to because they had run out of beds. And it was like the room. And then you think, okay,
Wow.
what's going on like
Yeah.
in that room?
Why is that the room?
Why is that the room?
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's I think that's super interesting as far as like getting back to what you were talking about and even all these older hospitals like even in Gettysburg and
Hmm.
all these
Oh,
places
yeah.
where I mean talk about, during wartime or things like
All that
that.
trauma. Hmm.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, I've been to Gettysburg a couple of times
It's amazing.
and yes. Yeah, the best time though, it's difficult is usually to go when there's always a lot of people in Gettysburg,
Right.
but I know that a lot of people go like in the summer around the anniversary of the battle itself.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's other times that you go and especially if it's quieter and you go stand out there and it's like, wow. Because I tell everybody, you know that for all the bodies they recovered and buried, you know that there's a lot of them that where they lay is where they lay. They're there.
That's right.
They did not get, especially in the Confederacy because the Unions picked
Mm-hmm.
up their dead.
Mm-hmm.
And but a lot of the Confederate they just like psh, nobody
Yeah.
went up there to pick up the bodies.
No, no. So there would be no headstone,
Nothing.
no, you know,
Nothing.
they were lucky to have any kind of identification on them, from what
Yeah.
I understood.
Yes. Yeah.
So you just didn't know who was lying there.
Well, sometimes even depending on the how can I say the degree of wounding, if you were
Hmm.
struck by a cannonball, sometimes
Hmm.
you couldn't even be identified by somebody looking at you.
Right.
That somebody could say, companion say, I saw so and so go down, or in
Hmm.
other words, there
Hmm.
was nothing to ever to tell your family, but they the winners, the North is going to pick up their dead.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and I imagine, remember, and I tell everybody, you know how fast the body disintegrates in the middle of the summer
Right. In a wool suit.
in a wool suit?
Yeah.
That was because it was
And
July, I believe, is when that battle was fought.
ooh,
S-
and you know it was bad.
It was
You know it
bad.
was bad.
Of course,
There's
of
there's
course.
several homes around
Hmm.
the South that were used as hospitals too.
Right.
And there's a couple over in Franklin that are known to have had the unfortunate privilege of doing
Uh,
amputations
yeah,
on
that's
soldiers.
unfortunately that's
Yes. And so there were so many done outside this one particular house,
yes.
that they said at one point during the war
Hmm.
that parts of bodies were stacked up to that second
Oh,
floor window.
God Almighty, that's horrible. That's
Hmm.
horrible. But yeah, they,
Bloody.
they they had to do what they call, I guess, the equivalent of field hospitals. It's like you
Yes.
said, they would take over somebody's house, like because we have, we need to do a surgery here, and this
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
this is the
Clean
only thing
off
we can
the
do.
kitchen table.
Yes,
That's where we're going to
yes,
do it.
yes. That
Boil
and
some water.
yeah, and some of them, and that's unfortunately that's war. But yeah, you
Hmm.
listen to some of these stories, and they were saying that some of the that you I don't know. I hear two versions. I hear that sometimes they did unnecessary amputations, but then the other side of it is that sometimes because of the type of wounding that there was, the shrapnel and like
Mhm.
if they had a chance to survive, it was only through amputation.
Right, right.
No, so
And no anesthesia.
no anesthesia.
So hand them either a piece of wood or a bullet
Yes,
to bite on.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's got. I can imagine some of those. That's why you see people sometimes go out and they have those battlefield reenactments and things like that.
Mhm.
Not the well, not the but the not the reenactors, but that they'll go someplace and sometimes they'll hear like the sound of the like a war going on,
Yes.
like the
Yes.
shooting or even cannons or the yells, and they'll be like, "What
Mhm.
in the world?"
Mhm.
And it's like and there's famous battles that get named, but there's a lot of skirmishes that would happen that
Everywhere.
they never really per se made the history book, but they
Right.
happened.
Exactly. And around here,
Hmm.
there, well, around any river,
Right.
there were some kind of settlements.
Yes, of course.
So that's why you find arrowheads and
Yes.
even arrow, shards or whatever, but bullets,
Hmm.
cannonballs, anything like that. We had one investigation just over the line in Alabama, and her haunting was caused by picking up arrowheads and
Oh my
different
God.
things from her property.
And
It
she
was
brought him
her
inside?
property. Her property. She brought them inside, and I mean, she had a
Oh,
collection. Walt on my team is the one that actually noticed it. I had never even thought about that at this
okay.
point. Even though I've lived here all my life, my brother collected arrowheads.
Right.
I didn't even think about this. I just saw her rock collection with arrowheads in it. And he asked her, he said, where did you get these? And she said, just out walking around on my property. And he said, did you leave anything when you took them? And she said, what do you mean? He said, did you leave something once you picked one up? She said, no, I just brought that in. He said, okay, that's one reason you have problems. You
Wow.
took from the Native Americans without giving them a gift.
Right, like an exchange.
You have to give a gift to them to stop your haunting.
And what was she
And
doing? What was the experience? What was going on in her house?
she was seeing people show up. She was having lots of footsteps, like some banging around.
Okay.
Things were coming in and out of the house. She would hear doors. She would
Wow.
hear just lots of grumbling. Um,
Okay.
they actually saw a couple of apparitions,
I was going to ask you,
and
was it shadow people or was it full?
both, both.
Oh,
Yeah. So she ended up doing. He told her. He said, "You need to go out and make like a little altar sacrifice, not a sacrifice, but
but
an
yeah, give something
offering.
back, like an offer them. Yeah, it
Make
could be any.
sure that you tell them that's what this is for, and that
Yes.
you're sorry you would never have taken anything without um, doing something like this if you had known. So you want to make it right. This is how you do it."
And did it work?
It did.
Ah, there you go.
It
Isn't
did.
that great?
Hmm.
Yeah, sometimes people don't realize that.
No, and that was my first experience with that.
Yeah, because you just
So,
think of it, it's there on the ground. Who cares? Like,
yeah, yeah. And you just find a pretty stone and you pick it up and take it home.
yes, yes. Well,
Yeah.
you hear about all these, what is it what's that ghost town? Is it Nevada or California? Something with a B. Something that they have anybody that takes anything from there, even if it's a piece of
Okay.
rock, they have bad luck and they end up returning it. Oh my God, and it
That's
starts with a
actually
B.
the Bell Witch Cave.
No, no, this is a
Yeah,
ghost town.
this
It was like an old gold mining town.
oh, yeah?
Yeah, when once these mines they peter out, then the
Uh-huh,
town goes
uh-huh.
belly up. It starts with a B. It'll come to me. It's either Nevada or in California. Ba
Okay.
Bell Marlene. Ba, B- I know somebody's going, it's that. It's ba Bodie, Bodie,
Okay,
Bodie.
okay.
And it's gotten this reputation where people have taken not even anything of value per se, because now it's people can you can go there and visit. It's like they even have it where they have park rangers there now. It's like you know a park where they've taken
Uh-huh.
a stone, like you said, a pretty stone,
Hmm.
and they interviewed like the park ranger or somebody or a caretaker or something goes, oh, we get stuff in the mail back all the time.
Yes,
Like, hey man, after I took this, my luck went from bad to worse. Just please put it back wherever.
you've heard of the Bell Witch.
Of course, yes, I have. That's a scary haunting, by the way.
This actually is in Tennessee, so Adams,
Yes.
Tennessee, not very far from me. But
Okay.
that actually has taken place there too. There's a
Oh, where
cave.
they have people that
Yes,
oh,
yes. So there's Indian burial ground.
okay.
The cabin that the Bells lived in is no longer there, but they
Okay.
have a replica, built. Um, where the Indian burial grounds are, there's a
Okay.
cave underneath it.
Ooh.
People
Here
would
we
take
go.
rocks out of the cave,
Every time you tell
and it wasn't long before they would mail them back.
that's that thing I'm telling you that under. Have they ever, because there were so many theories, have they ever come to some conclusion what was the Bell Witch? Because, because they were saying it was, I think it was a lady that lived there, but
Mhm.
I
They
don't know.
That was the big story for the
Hmm.
longest, that it was, Kate Batts,
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes.
and, there was a land dispute.
Okay.
But I think they've come to realize it's more that the Native American ground was disturbed.
I see. Okay.
And
Okay.
so, she would show herself in different forms, and one of them was a wolf. A
See.
friend of mine, I actually went there last year. So I had
Okay.
never been to the Bellwitch Cave, Bellwitch property, and I went last
Okay.
year with some friends, and it was it's on the Trail of Tears.
Ooh. Okay.
So we're already talking big
Yes.
Native American ground
Yes. Yes.
and lots of trauma there.
Uh-huh.
So we're there on a full moon,
Okay.
and an electrical storm blows in.
Oh boy.
And it's one of the best storms I believe I have seen in a while.
Okay.
Lightning just all the way
Yeah.
down, just incredible lightning. So it sidelined our investigation about an hour and a half, but we were in three different groups. I had
Okay.
been on the Native American burial ground section. Another
Okay.
group had been in the replica cabin section, and the third were in the cave. They
Okay.
couldn't get out.
They had to stay in there?
While it was
Oh.
raining and coming down like it was, they were trapped. So after the hour and a half, they come trudging up the hill. They're going to take a break with us. And my friend Lee pulls out his phone. He had been taking video. And he said, Cyn, look at this. And I looked over at it and I said, "Ooh, play that again." And he played it again. I said, "Was somebody behind Regina?" He said, "No. Regina," which is my other friend, "was
Uh,
telling the story inside the cave, in the very back of the cave, as far back as you can go in. And it curves around there, and you can't get into that section." So
okay.
she was stopped right there telling the story of something that had happened about the cave. And above her head was the back wall, and a shadow goes across the back wall. I said, "Well, did someone go in front of the lights?" He said, "No, those lights are way up high.
Okay.
Nobody had crawled up on stones to do that." And I said, "Play it again, play it again." Played it again. I said, "Lee, that's a wolf." And it
Oh.
was the shadow of a wolf walking behind her head.
Oh. Let me tell you something
It,
though. It's a
it
perfect
was
that
great.
electrical storm kind of deal. Oh.
And on native ground,
Yes.
and on the Trail of Tears, and
Oh
a
God.
full moon.
You had everything. All the ingredients were
It
there.
was incredible. It was an incredible night.
Now, I know that was such when you look at the story of so many people that were witness, like how can I say credible, like have
Hmm.
reverends and they had people coming
Yeah,
out there.
yeah. Well, even the president.
Yes, no, they had everybody in there.
Yeah.
Everybody came out there. This was so well known, and the thing was, people walked the. They had people arriving there thinking, "Oh, this is nonsense. This isn't. This is nothing," and then when
Mhm.
they would leave, like believers, like,
Yeah. And they do get stones back all the time.
"Oh, really? I had not heard that. I
Hmm.
had not heard that part of
Hmm.
people taking stuff like even a stone, and then it's like, here, have it back,
Yeah,
thanks." But
take it back.
let me tell you something. Sam. It has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. Here's my rescue kitty, Marnie. Here's my
Oh.
girl. I found her out in like in the country, and there was
Mhm.
like a container, and I think she was the runt, and she had fallen out. She had just opened her eyes up, and the
Oh.
guy who owned the property goes, "Ah, don't worry, Mama Cat's around." And I was like, I went in there. I climbed back into it was like an old, trucking container that had been left on the property, and I looked. I said, well, maybe the rest of the kittens are in there. And I put her back, and she came out, and she fell. And I was like, oh. And then I said, if I leave her out here, something's gonna pick her off.
Hmm.
And I brought her, and I bottle fed her. That's right. You
Oh.
pain in the neck. Get out of here. Bye bye. Bye. Get out of here, Marnie.
When we first started, I had three next to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, yeah, no, this one she comes and she's like, and sometimes she'll go to sleep and she'll sleep on the bed and she's fine, but then she'll wake up in the middle of the night. It's like, oh, time to play, and I was like, ah,
Yes. They got their own time frame.
yeah, I know, but she's I've got my puppies down here. They're not puppies, they're kind of older, but they're like hanging out, like they know, don't make any noise because then she'll give you the stink eye. Yeah, no, no, I tell everybody, my audience knows this is my enforcer. It's full of water.
Yes. It's a good one.
This is my enforcer. And even the cat, I go, look what it is. And they're like, oh
Mhm.
no, it's
Mhm.
it's the water thing.
All I have to do is shake it.
Yes, they know it like, oh,
Oh, no. No,
please.
no. Everybody's good. Everybody's good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It has been absolutely wonderful. For my podcast listeners, and what is the website where they can find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Cyn Shrader Hill Author. You
Okay,
can also find my group, Elk Valley Paranormal, there.
okay.
If you are interested in my books, I've got 5 on Amazon right now,
Yes, okay.
Cyn Shrader Hill. And Google me. You can.
When's your next? I know you said that on your bio that you were working on something. Do you know when they're going to be released or not
I
yet?
am working on Death's Doorstep right now, which is near death experiences,
Okay,
angel rescues, and spirit warnings. So
perfect.
that one's the next one coming out. Hopefully within the next month, that one will be
Okay,
done.
okay,
A couple of months after that, I'm bringing out the second Signs book, and then I've got a third one I'm working on that
okay.
some of the darker stories, similar to the Realm of Shadows. So that
Okay,
kind
so
of
you
spooky, spooky.
never a dull moment. You're a busy
Never,
girl.
never a dull. Well, I tell you, I'm working a lot more this year on mine because the last 14 and a half months were spent working on Mark's cookbook.
He
So
has a cookbook? Oh my God. I didn't know that. Oh my God.
my mean
My,
old grandma's good old cookbook and more.
oh, that is great.
Real
I did. Oh my
thick.
God. Look at that.
It's 8.5 by 11. It's on Amazon,
Okay.
and it's got his grandmother's recipes, his recipes that he's collected over the
Uh,
years.
check her
He
out with a rolling pin.
Yes, that was his grandmother's sister,
Okay.
actually, that he patterned that after. But he's got the story of the Sin Eater in here and funeral food,
Oh wow. Yes.
Frozen Charlotte. And if you don't know what Frozen Charlotte is,
No,
it's
I don't know what that is.
it's what our China dolls are patterned after. It was this
Okay.
girl back in the 1800s that was too vain to put a coat on to go
Okay.
to this festival, and so her fiance took her in the sleigh miles and miles in the snow to this ball. When he got there, he reached to help her down, but she was frozen stiff, hence Frozen
Wow.
Charlotte.
I get it.
So
That's a
there's
great
actually
story.
desserts frozen Charlottes in here. And so he's
So
got
many.
that. He's got pretty sister recipes, which are the good ones, and he's got ugly sister recipes, which
Okay.
you don't want to have a bite of, probably. And it's
Okay.
got everything from haggis and uh,
Ooh.
chitlins and
I know you got to
you know,
develop a taste for some of those things.
some of the I would taste them if someone else would cook them. I don't want to
Okay,
cook them in my house, but this took 14 and a half months. It's that
I believe it.
1,788 recipes.
Wow.
Yes.
Man, you could be making stuff for how many years? Like one a
Oh,
day?
forever. He's got things from the 1600s in here. He's got the oldest recipe in here is from Russia. It's
Okay.
a pierogi, not pierogi. It's a pierogi.
Okay.
So it was around 900 AD. So
Wow.
he's all kinds of recipes in this thing. So
I didn't
that's what
know.
I spent 14 and a half months
So
on.
now you're like, okay, now
Now,
you're,
this year's my year.
yeah, it's like, now I'm telling you, telling you.
And
People, do,
I edit for him for his books. And
okay.
he does my covers and my illustrations.
Okay.
So that's how we
Yeah, so
started out.
even you swap out. Thank
Mhm.
you so much. It has been absolutely wonderful. I got to bring you back because we
Thank
got to
you
keep on
so
with
much.
these stories.
I would love to. I would love to.
Yeah, we've got some great stories. Yours are fantastic. But
Thank
I'll
you.
put a link in the credits of the show. And thank you so much. I want to wish you the best of luck and everything.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye. Wow. I could keep, like always, I could keep talking to her like hours and hours because she's got great stories. She's got great stories. And that's really what it's all about because the oral tradition, like I said, of the ghost stories is, again, I want to say this, I want to repeat myself, but I don't care. Contrary to what we see with the paranormal shows, which is, that format. The original ghost stories were like the oral tradition. And like I said, it was just a story. Sometimes you knew who the ghost was or the backstory to it. Other times it was just the story of a haunted location. And for all you knew, the ghost was still there. All right. And again, like some of the stories, you never know who's the why it started or how long it's been there. And like I said, and sometimes even people that tell you stories in modern times, you never find out because they just decide the only way to get out of this pickle of the haunting is I'm going to move out. Like, forget it. And I've said it, even when I was doing investigations, we would always leave the door open for like, if you want to call us back, if you keep on having problems or what do you want to do. Sometimes, believe it or not, people would sometimes you would go in there and you would kind of verify for them, yes, there is something going on here. Maybe we might need to come back, but we have a feeling. Like I said, this is not where, first of all, like she was saying at the beginning, not every paranormal investigation does what the people that live there describe to you. Sometimes they don't at all, or they give you very little. All right. So basically, you're going on maybe what you captured there and what they've told you. But sometimes you don't get the full Monty, with the one time that you're there. And let's face it, not everybody, you basically, a lot of times they're opening their house to a stranger. So, contrary to what you see on some of these shows that they'll tell you, oh, yeah, like get rid of it. There's some people that say, well, we got to think about it because you say, okay, call us back, tell us what you want to do, what you decide to do. Um, Based on what's going on here, this is what we think it is. Or maybe we might need to come back because we still haven't really figured out how to handle this. What's the identity if there's more than one? Because I said sometimes if there is a true haunting, they don't cooperate on cue. They don't. As a matter of fact, you find out that sometimes when it's intelligent hauntings, they kind of split. They either go to the attic, the basement. They make themselves scarce. Not all of them are willing to like. So anyway, a lot of times we would follow up, especially if we hadn't heard from them. Come to find out, these people they left. They just if they were, especially if it was like a rental or they had the financial means, they would put the house up for sale and we're out of here. We're out of here. We don't want to find out who it is. We don't want to find out how to take care of it. And the most that I think that they were like more than worried about is like, I just don't want it to come with us. All right. I don't want it to follow us. But besides that, This was their cure all for the situation. It was like, forget it. I don't want you to come back and find out and tell me what the name of the ghost is. All right. I don't care. Just enough that you told me that there is something going on here. It's not my imagination. It's not what I'm out of here. And you'd be surprised for, and this is especially, I want to say, once upon a time, people were not as transient as they are now. But depending on the neighborhood, or even if it's an apartment building, you don't even have the, how's this, the benefits of having maybe a neighbor give you a backstory. Like, oh, you know that in that apartment there was a shootout or somebody died or so yeah, sometimes in the perfect world you'll get the neighbor or something or even the landlord, which most landlords will never tell you this story. I don't care how the landlords usually do not. They will give you the bold-faced line, go, no, I don't know. They're never going to tell you that there was maybe somebody died there or there was some crime or much less that maybe that apartment or that house or whatever it is doesn't hold a tenant down. All right. They don't. Why? Because this is how they make their money. And they're thinking the last thing I want is for it to get out that this place is, haunted and then, people want to rent it or then they'll imagine things or I got to discount it or one of those deals. So, sometimes people just like, I'm out of here. I don't want to find out. I don't want to know. They ask around and it's almost like if you even, it's even worse when from some source, whether they do their own digging or they do have a neighbor or somebody that tells them, oh yeah, this is what happened there. And they're like, what? In other words, that's just like, that confirms like, forget it. That's even more reason why I'm out of here. All right. And there's a lot of ghost stories. I want to say, believe it or not, the majority of them, that's how it works out. People leave. And then you'll even have people that will tell you, oh, we lived in his house or his apartment. And they didn't move away. They stayed in the town, and they'll say that there came a point where the house was just there vacant, and eventually it was demolished or it was just vacant, and nobody moved there. Like the landlord gives up on it because they just can't hold down people, and they never really know what what was the catalyst, what was driving what was going on there. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. A lot of times, more often than not. Because that's what I'm saying. It's like, like when you see the CSI effect, all these CSI shows that you think, the CSI team's going to come in and give all the answers and solve and find out the whodunit. Same thing with paranormal work. A lot of times, a good portion of the time, you really never know who or why. You just have the after effects. And in some cases, not all the time, it's not the place, it's the person. It's whoever's there, you know? It's whoever's there. And that's why sometimes you'll do the research, or if you get to talk to a neighbor or something, if the and there's like, man, there's nothing ever really happened at this place. The normal stuff that we always give a tribute to a haunting. And it's because later come to find out, it's like, yeah, you moved away, and it's like we might never have heard from you, but later on, you kind of sometimes it's not the place, it's the people. Like, yeah, you moved, but good luck on that. And again, I've said it before, I've had investigations where you start talking to them and they kind of fess up because you always ask them, like, oh, have you ever had like experiences like this? Because we always look at it from the end of, or maybe you're psychic, maybe you're a budding medium. Maybe there's something about you, not because, you know, you might still have something paranormal going on there. But we always ask them, have you had this experience before? And you'd be surprised how many people will say confidentially to you, or because they think that you're kinder about it. And then they'll start recounting a history of hauntings. And then you realize, wait, 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 wait. It's you. You're the thing. You're the, not the object, the attachment you're it. Now, why it's them could be because they are a psychic slash medium, which means that they have dead people walking around trying to make them like, I want you to see me. I want you to talk for me. I want you to find my whatever. So it's like, yeah, wherever you go, there you are.
Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's that they've been dabbling in occult. They got an attachment, and it's a traveling attachment. It's them. Um, they sometimes you'll have people that their auras thin out, drug abuse, substance abuse. And they'll get an attachment. Yeah, they could go to the hospital and they'll have somebody piggyback with them. God forbid, even at the worst places where they frequent, where they do because like attracts like. I mean, there's a million places, and it's like, well, good luck. I mean, again, and sometimes you'll have that where the person has their own personal spiritual turbulence accompaniment, and then they move into a place that has its own haunting or its own thing, and then that's where you get the fireworks, right? That's when you get the fireworks, and the things that happen are like really, and really what is just two sources. And I want to say that believe it or not, sometimes there's a battle of the spirits where you might have something walking with that person, and then there's something that's already there, whether it's the grandfather, the grandpa, the grandma, the owner, the guy that built the house, or the guy that died in the room in the back, whatever the origin is, and they're like, "Who's this guy?" Let's walking around, and then that clash, right? That's like sometimes what sparks off a lot of like poltergeist activity, poltergeist type of activity. How's that? Which noticeable things of this nature, or in some cases, not all the time, where you'll have like an uptick of anger, like amongst family members, or even a person that'll say, "Man, I'm not usually like that," or like you're mad. You realize yourself, "Man, I'm mad, and I don't know why I'm so upset about this, but what's going on?" And it's because what's going on around you on a metaphysical plane, and you have no idea, or sometimes you do. And that's a whole nother show. So anyway, guys, I hope you like this interview with Cyn. I will put a link to her website on the credits of the show. Go to miamighostchronicles.com or mpellicer.com. There you find links to everything. Podcast versions of the shows, video links, link to my Substack newsletter place, everything, everything. Um, Articles, you name it. That's where you're going to find it. All right. And like I tell everybody, especially the podcast version, I have the MP3 files. You can listen on the browser. You can download them. The only plus thing about that is you don't get commercial interruptions. Or all these different podcast platforms, wherever they are, whatever they, I don't care, Spotify, you name it, iHeart, which I'm on all of them by the way. You're gonna get the interruptions of, and I know that some of them have even the paid stuff. You still get interruptions. So if you want to listen to anything without commercial interruption, go to the website directly. So thanks for coming back and spending this time with me. Again, I've got great guests lined up, returning guests and new guests. And please come back. And I hope you enjoyed this show. Take care.